It was a crisp autumn evening when I found myself seated on a park bench, the sun dipping low and casting golden hues over the trees, lost in thought as I waited for my friend Sarah. We had grown up together, our lives entwined in a winding road of shared memories, laughter, and even occasional disagreements. One of those disagreements surfaced less than a week ago when Sarah casually mentioned she had rehomed her cat, Luna, because she was moving into a new apartment that didn't allow pets. I remember how my stomach churned at those words, the implications weighing heavy as I fought against the instinct to defend the word or home, a term that felt cold and clinical in this context. To me, it signified a relinquishment of responsibility, a decision that felt too easy for someone who had adored their pet just weeks before. When she arrived, enthusiasm radiated from her as she spoke about her new place, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I had to say something. "Did you really have to rehome her?" I asked, my voice teetering between concern and accusation. Sarah's smile faltered, her eyes flicked away, a flicker of guilt dancing on her features. "Well, I didn't have a choice," she replied defensively, her fingers tracing the fabric of her jacket. It felt like an innocent conversation spiraling into something deeper, an unspoken battle of values. As she continued detailing the space in her new apartment, excitement spilling from her like the leaves falling around us, I wrestled with the weight of my words. Was I being harsh? Was it fair to confront her at that moment, when all she wanted was to share her joy? I could see Luna's big, curious eyes, the way she would curl up in my lap when I visited Sarah, and it just felt wrong. "You could have found someone who could take care of her properly," I said, my voice steadier now, watching for Sarah's response. There was a long silence. Her expression closed off, and for the first time, I felt the distance between us. "You don't get it, do you?" she finally said, a hint of anger creeping into her tone. "I loved her, but I couldn't keep her. I had to think about my life. You know how it is when you're on your own." That was it. My heartbeat pulsed loud in my ears as I processed her admission, my mind rushing through memories of late-night snack raids indulging in comfort food, the unshakable bond that had once brought us close. I was the anchor, and she had seemed so adrift. I wanted the best for her, but at that moment, I felt like I had done the unthinkable. We were friends, yet I had challenged a decision that cut deeper than I realized. After that evening, our communications chilled. She began to post pictures of her new apartment, filled with stylish decor and vibrant colors, each post a reminder of how our lives were heading in different directions. I longed to reach out, to mend the bridge I had burned with my misplaced need to correct. A few weeks later, I decided to invite her over. For coffee. As I poured and we settled into the familiar comfort of my living room, I took a leap. "I'm sorry for how I reacted. It wasn't my place to judge your decisions. I was scared of losing our friendship," she sighed, her defenses lowering. "I didn't mean to shut you out. It just hurt to hear it from you." There was a catharsis in admitting our faults, a moment where we synchronized our emotions, realizing the importance of honesty. As we talked it through, we both learned the value of understanding versus judgment. Maybe I wasn't the asshole, but just a friend trying to navigate a complex emotional landscape. I remember leaving the conversation feeling lighter, wrapped in a new layer of connection with Sarah, imperfect yet honest. In our journey to find common ground, we had stitched together a stronger bond, one that could withstand the challenges of life, including the heartbreak of saying goodbye to a pet. And as autumn slipped into winter, I reflected on how it was all right to feel deeply, to weigh decisions heavily, even when it caused ripples in our relationships. It's not about being right or wrong. Sometimes, it's simply about learning to listen. Update: a few months later, Sarah reached out, asking if I could join her for a fundraiser at the local animal shelter. Passion gleamed in her eyes as she spoke about the importance of responsible pet ownership and the struggles of animals in need. "I think it's time I helped make a difference in some way," she said. In that moment, I knew Sarah had turned her experience into motivation, reshaping her heartache into advocacy. As we teamed up to raise awareness together, that initial tension, that moment of conflict, became a stepping stone into something greater, a testament to the resilience of friendship wrapped in understanding and growth. We started planning the fundraiser with a sense of purpose that I hadn't expected. As the days passed, I found myself leaning into this project with all the energy I had, eager to support Sarah in her newfound mission. The community pulled together in a way that was almost magical. Local businesses donated food, prizes, and even some services for the event. It was amazing to see people rally around something so meaningful. The shelter, a small yet bustling space filled with the soulful mews and barks of its inhabitants, became a second home to both Sarah and me. We spent hours making flyers, organizing online donations, and promoting the event on social media. With each post and share, I noticed Sarah's spirits rising significantly. She had transformed from a person who felt the heaviness of her previous decision into a beacon of light for others who were struggling with similar choices. The night before the fundraiser, we sat on the floor of my living room, strewn with papers, colorful decorations, and half-empty takeout containers. The air was alive with excitement, and I couldn't shake the feeling of how much this experience had brought us closer. As we laughed and shared stories about the cats we both cherished and the oddities we had come across at the shelter, I felt a sense of peace settle over us. The weight of that initial argument slowly faded, replaced by shared laughter and dreams of making a real difference. We had both learned from the experience. I was grateful for the way she had opened up about her choices, and she was hopeful about helping others avoid similar pitfalls. The day of the fundraiser dawned bright and sunny, a perfect backdrop for our event. People arrived with smiles, families brought their children, and a few furry friends bounced alongside them. I could see Sarah in her element as she mingled with the crowd, reading to the kids gathered around her, while I handled the donations and set up a photo booth for some adorable pet portraits. We had even arranged for a local animal trainer to give demonstrations. The allure of seeing cute animals working alongside humans drew in a larger crowd than we could have anticipated. I kept glancing at Sarah throughout, marveling at how far she'd come since that difficult conversation. Around mid-afternoon, as we watched people bidding on hours with the dog trainer, I noticed Sarah standing by herself a short distance away, a frown creasing her brow. I approached cautiously. "Hey, you good?" I asked, concerned. I had just seen her shine moments before. She looked up at me, her eyes a mixture of uncertainty and frustration. "I guess I never really thought about how much my choice affected others," she admitted quietly. "I mean, look at all these people. They're here to support a cause. Meanwhile, I felt like I'd let my cat down." Her voice trembled slightly, and I felt a surge of compassion wash over me. It was a moment of raw vulnerability, and I understood that her past choices still haunted her despite her efforts to turn things around. The crowd buzzed in the background, but the world felt still between us. "Sarah," I said softly, "what you did wasn't ideal, but it was part of your journey, and now you're using that to make a difference." I took a moment to gather my thoughts before continuing. "Every person here has made mistakes in one way or another. Your honesty about what happened with your cat has inspired others to take responsibility. You're helping people understand that rehoming doesn't equal giving up. It can be a tough decision with a new beginning waiting on the other side." Her expression shifted slightly as she absorbed my words. "You really think so?" she asked, a hint of hope flickering in her eyes. I nodded, reassuring her with a smile. "I really do. And look around us. You're creating a community of awareness and compassion. That's bigger than just one bad decision." It was as if a dam inside her had broken, releasing the tension she'd held onto for so long, and she smiled, a genuine spark lighting up her features. As the day unfolded, I watched Sarah as she engaged with attendees, sharing stories, and embracing newfound friendships with those passionate about animal welfare. It filled me with warmth to witness her come alive in this atmosphere, where her past hadn't defined her, and her desire to advocate for animals took precedence. We did well that day beyond our expectations. We raised more funds than we could have hoped for and brought awareness to animal welfare like never before. As the sun began to set, and people started to gather their things, Sarah and I took a moment to reflect. "We really did it," she sighed, exhaustion lining her voice, but joy danced in her eyes. I felt a wave of pride swell within me as I nodded, the remnants of our earlier disagreement wholly eclipsed by this sense of achievement and camaraderie. It would take time for Sarah to completely forgive herself, and while we both knew the road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, I was glad she had found purpose again. In the weeks following the event, we continued to volunteer at the shelter, slowly helping build a network of support and fostering hope in our community. I began to realize that even the most painful mistakes could pave the way for healing and understanding. They might be rough avenues, but they often lead us to where we are truly meant to be. With every adoption story we shared, every happy ending we witnessed, I felt grateful to be by Sarah's side, an unexpected partner in this journey towards redemption. Eventually, one evening after a long shift at the shelter, Sarah and I found ourselves just sitting in the quiet, the hum of the night wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. "I think I'm finally at peace with what happened," she whispered, her voice calm and assured. "And it's because of you." I smiled softly, feeling that once tense chapter of our friendship close like a book meeting its last page, knowing well that every ending sparks the light of a new beginning. The lessons embedded within lay the foundation for exploring our own journeys with newfound empathy and strength. As the stars flickered overhead, I marveled at how far we had come together. Gone were the days of tense discussions and misunderstandings, replaced by an unspoken bond forged in shared experiences and common goals. The shelter had become more than just a workplace, it was our sanctuary, a place where laughter spilled over the cages of cats and dogs alike, mingling with the sweet smell of pet food and the warm glow of the overhead lights. Evenings spent sorting donations turned into brainstorming sessions for future campaigns, and I could see the spark of determination in Sarah's eyes, illuminating her path forward. "You know," I said after a gentle pause, "if we keep this up, I think we'll make quite an impact." She chuckled softly, her laugh a melody that drove away the night's chill. The chilly breeze that wafted through the open window felt lovely, a reminder of the world outside, but inside, it felt like we had created our own safe haven, dedicated to ensuring others would find solace just as we had. One day, while wolfing down pizza in the break room, we started discussing the idea of an awareness poster for the fundraiser, describing responsible pet adoption in vivid detail. She suggested we feature personal stories from people who adopted pets from the shelter. I thought it was brilliant and couldn't help but share my own experience, how I had adopted my cat, Luna, who had been found roaming the streets, frightened and alone. The pure joy on her face as she listened reminded me how storytelling could bridge gaps, fostering connection and understanding amongst us. Every new idea swirled in the air like the sweet aroma of the pepperoni pie resting between us. The potential felt palpable. It dawned on me, as laughter echoed off the walls, that these projects were transforming both Sarah and me, aiding us in our journeys of growth, hers from overcoming loss, and mine from learning to advocate fiercely for those who couldn't speak for themselves. As the day of the fundraiser approached, an air of excitement hung around us, and so did the nervous anticipation. We prepared for an influx of community members at the shelter, hoping to raise funds and awareness. With the event looming closer, however, the reality of putting ourselves out there made my stomach flutter. What if I stumbled over my words? What if no one showed up? Every worry was a small cloud in the bright sky of possibility, and Sarah seemed to sense my anxiety, offering reassuring smiles and gentle pats on the back as we honed our message. "We're just sharing our love for animals," she'd remind me, her strength palpable as she navigated her own hesitations. Her calm radiance became my anchor, and slowly, I realized that our paths intertwined not just in friendship but in the mission we shared. On the day of the fundraiser, the shelter vibrated with life and energy, various booths filled with animals looking for homes, volunteers bustling, and the intimate chatter of community filled the air. As people poured into the building, I felt a swell of pride. We had worked hard for this moment, igniting conversations about responsible pet care and the responsibilities that came with adopting. I was surprised when Sarah took her place behind the mic, addressing the crowd with vulnerability and strength. She spoke of the harsh realities within the world of animal welfare, but her voice trembled with passion and love, speaking about how significant it was to choose patience over impulse when it came to rehoming pets. It struck me then, witnessing the audience captivated by her story, that our paths were not merely parallel but actually woven together in a tapestry of understanding, compassion, and collective effort. Later that evening, as the last of the guests trickled out and the leftover pizza grew cold on the table, we took a moment to revel in our success, counting the donations and smiling at the progress we made. "I used to feel so lost, you know?" Sarah admitted, her brows furrowed slightly. "But talking about my experience, sharing it with others, it's like a weight lifted." I nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized that this journey had not only been about healing for her but also a restorative experience for me too. Having pushed my insecurities aside to advocate for animals had carved out a stronger version of myself, one unafraid to speak up for what mattered. Eventually, as we started to clean up, I could feel the warmth of possibilities ahead. Perhaps it was more than just a fundraiser, it had become a heartfelt rallying call for the community on behalf of those animals still waiting for their forever homes. Months later, Sarah and I would still reminisce about that day, but more importantly, we continued to press on, reaching toward other endeavors that would help better our connection to animals in need. As we expanded our projects, I often thought of that original conflict, a simple miscommunication that had evolved into something profoundly transformative. A reminder that with understanding and time, even the deepest wounds could become a wellspring of strength and new beginnings, each day unfolding a little more like a gentle unfurling of a leaf in spring. It wasn't until a chilly autumn day months later when Sarah called with a breathless excitement. "You need to come over. There's someone here who needs a friend." Curious and slightly amused, I hurried over, only to find her nursing another stray she had taken in, a timid kitten with soulful eyes peering up at me. In that moment, surrounded by warmth and laughter, I knew that although there would always be challenges ahead, Sarah and I had learned how to navigate our way through life's twists and turns, one heartfelt story at a time. And perhaps, from one rehomed cat to another, we had both discovered that every end could lead to a new beginning, forging deeper connections in the heart of it all. I never thought I'd gain clarity from a conversation that boiled down to a simple question: am I the asshole for reminding my mom that she disappeared for 6 years? It all started on an ordinary Tuesday, just after my 22nd birthday, when I received a text from my mom, one that seemed to cascade through the silence we had established over time. "Can we talk?" The message read, punctuated with an ellipsis that left something unsaid, shrouded in tension. After everything, I wasn't sure what talking meant anymore. I'd spent too long trying to piece together the echoes of my childhood. The splintered memories of her absence were like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. She left when I was 14, without a note, without a sign. I remember spending countless nights pacing my bedroom, wrapping the arms of my favorite stuffed animal tighter around my chest as if it could absorb the sadness creeping under my skin, desperately waiting for the front door to creak open and reveal her to me, only, it never did. When she resurfaced 6 years later, it was an awkward reunion. She was different, and so was I. She floated in and out of my life, wearing an expression that oscillated between remorse and urgency, as if she were a ghost trying to tether herself to a world she had once inhabited. We meandered through awkward lunches and tentative conversations, but the weight of what had happened still hung between us like an unspoken wound, raw and unhealed. My friends advised me to make peace with her, to forgive and forget, but the truth was, forgiveness felt like an uphill battle often punctuated by waves of resentment. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching fireflies flicker like tiny memories in the dusk, I felt a surge of boldness. The conversation had ebbed and flowed, and my mom's laughter was light, yet it triggered a memory I thought I could gloss over. "You know, it's strange," I said, almost tentatively, "that you were just gone for all those years." The moment the words spilled from my lips, everything shifted. Her laughter froze, the carefree late summer air turned thick as she turned to me, wide-eyed with surprise. I had never directly confronted her about disappearing, and maybe that was the mistake I had made all along. The evening spiraled into an emotional chasm, her defense mechanisms kicking in with a vehemence I had never witnessed before. She insisted I didn't get it, that nobody understood what she went through, her voice rising and falling like a tumultuous sea. I watched her struggle to articulate what I knew she couldn't, a deep-rooted pain that bubbled beneath her surface. But what I had said pierced through the surface tension of our fragile newfound relationship, rendering her defenses useless. I felt like I had triggered a dormant storm inside her, and while part of me anguished over this, the other fired with a stubborn insistence to be heard. "You left me," I whispered, and with that, the tremor of truth hung palpably in the air. I wasn't sure if I was asking for an apology or for her to acknowledge my pain, but it seemed to matter less than the cathartic release of finally expressing my resentment. After what felt like hours of silence, she finally spoke. "I'm so sorry," her voice fractured like glass, each word laced with the weight of regret. As we both sat in the quiet aftermath, I realized that this moment was a turning point for us, a tentative bridge that flickered with the promise of new foundations. This wasn't an easy reconciliation. I still wrestled with the anger, the abyss of loneliness stretched before me, but it became clear that she, too, was trapped in her own reservoir of regret. Our past was marred, yet the possibility of healing was glimmering at the horizon. Weeks rolled by, each conversation layered with new understanding, moments where I reminded her how difficult her absence was and the emotional scars it left, but she met me with transparency, peeling back her trauma like layers of an onion. Eventually, we crafted a bond riddled not just with apologies but with a shared willingness to confront the realities of our intertwined lives. Though the past couldn't be rewritten, it became clearer that I didn't want to dwell on it forever. Instead, I aimed to look towards what lay ahead and how we could forge a future from the ashes of our fragmented past. In an unexpected twist of fate, my initial question transformed into a catalyst for healing. I found compassion for my own pain, an awareness that understanding can twist miracles out of memories that haunt and separate. In the end, as we walked hand in hand one summer evening, I quietly realized I was not the asshole. I had simply needed to remind her of the truth to reclaim my own narrative and, perhaps, hers alongside it. As I wrap up this story, I can't help but reflect on how dramatically things can evolve. For anyone who stumbles upon this, if you've found yourself in a similar position, Don't shy away from the hard truths. Sometimes the path to healing is paved with discomfort and confrontation, and that's not just okay, it can be transformative. Update: a few months later, we still have our ups and downs, but we talk regularly. We even plan family dinners now. It's a work in progress, but losing her taught me the value of open communication. Sometimes, reminding someone of their old self is precisely what you both need to move forward. As I sank into the familiar comfort of my worn-out armchair, I couldn't help but smile at how unconventional our journey had been. In the months since that pivotal moment, a conversation that unearthed years of unresolved pain, I felt like I was traversing a landscape continuously covered in fresh snow, each step unraveling new layers of understanding that had remained buried for so long. My mom and I had made significant strides, but the relationship was far from perfect. We had our fair share of awkward silences and unresolved grievances that seemed to loom over dinner tables like unsettling guests who just wouldn't leave. Yet each time we gathered, a collection of mismatched forks and plates heaped with homemade pasta or tacos, we found ourselves leaning a little more towards one another, laughter puncturing the tension that would have trapped us once. I remember one evening when we decided on Mexican, the warm kitchen filling with the spicy scents of sautéed peppers and garlic. Our conversation drifted to lighter territory. My mom made a joke about how many cooking shows I had watched. I couldn't help but tease back about her questionable interpretation of a taco. She laughed, her face lighting up as she recalled how I had always criticized her less than authentic attempts in the kitchen. The ease of it all was beautiful and yet fragile, like the last leaves of autumn trembling on the branches before winter fully set in. But amid these sporadic bursts of joy, we would still occasionally trip over the jagged stones of unresolved tension. There were days when the memories of her disappearance loomed heavily in the air, unspoken, a reminder of discomfort hanging like a fog. While we made efforts to engage in deeper conversations about the past, she often glossed over the harder parts, and I had to remind myself, sometimes in frustration, that healing doesn't always mean confronting everything at once. I learned this not just from our interactions but from conversations with friends who had similarly tangled familial relationships. Each interaction became a delicate balancing act as I tried to weigh my need for transparency against her apparent aversion to confronting certain aspects of her absence. But deep down, I felt there was a possibility, a gentle pulse of hope amid the chaos, that we could find a way through it together. One rainy afternoon, a few months into our renewed relationship, I was sifting through old family photos while dusting the shelves in my bedroom. I uncovered an image of us, taken during a camping trip when I was about 10. In the picture, we were grinning widely, her hair wild and tousled by the wind, a soft sunlight draping us with warmth. I hesitated, sensing an urge to share it with her, wanting to evoke the nostalgia we avoided, but anxiety wrestled at my throat. What if it prompted an uncomfortable conversation? What if I opened up a door that was best left closed? In the end, a quiet determination won out. I forwarded the image to her, and my heart raced as I waited for her response, uncertain of what would surface. A few moments later, my phone buzzed, a simple reply from Mom: "I remember this day. We should go camping again sometime." The words settled around me like a gentle embrace. In that small, unexpected moment, I realized how essential it was to continue fostering these connections, however tentative. Each memory shared, each laugh exchanged, and even the silent contemplations acted as glue, mending a bond that had once frayed to its breaking point. So we planned several family outings, trips to the park, impromptu movie nights, and yes, even that camping trip, which turned out to be a beautiful disaster with an overzealous raccoon raiding our snacks. Each stumble, each genuine laugh, further loosened the decades of hurt, allowing us avenues of genuine connection. Life isn't simply about resolving conflicts, I discovered, it's about embracing the raw, unfiltered moments of humanity, allowing them to reshape your understanding of each other without losing sight of where you both began. Reflecting on these experiences, I chuckled at how naive I had once been, thinking that confronting my mom about her previous disappearance would be the master key unlocking a perfect relationship. The truth was, we humans seem more like a patchwork quilt made of an array of fabric scraps, each piece significant in its imperfection, stitched together by our experiences, laughter, and the love that survived the storms. And now, as I stood amidst the remnants of our initial unresolved conflicts, I felt a quiet pride swell in my heart. We were moving forward, not flawlessly, but rather with intention and openness, and that's what mattered most. Update: it's been nearly a year since I sent that first photo. My mom finally decided to visit my place for the holidays, a huge step for us both. We tackled all the chaos together, barely burnt cookies, holiday songs we forgot the words to, and moments filled with laughter where unspoken truths only led us closer, like the final stitches in our newly knitted bond. There's still room for improvement, reflections on the past yet to unfold, but although we still have our ups and downs, I hold on to the sheer thrill of discovering that reminding someone of their worth can also truly mean reminding yourself. The holiday season that year felt almost surreal, like stepping into a storybook where you get to rewrite the characters and their fates. As my mom arrived at my apartment, the usual nervous tension that would rise in my chest was strangely absent, replaced instead by a flutter of excitement. She came with a suitcase, yes, but it was filled with more than just clothes. It was packed with a hefty dose of hope. We started off small, greeting each other with hesitant smiles that quickly warmed into embraces that longed for connection. We slid into the kitchen, a realm both familiar and foreign as we attempted to recreate our old family traditions. I remember eyeing the kitchen timer and thinking about how I had to remind her it was okay to laugh at our mistakes, instead of crying over them, like before. The cookies were hilariously imperfect, the kind that would make even the worst baking show contestants proud, yet we tried them anyway, laughing over the half-burnt edges and the slight bitterness of too much cinnamon. As we peeled away the layers of holiday chaos around us, our conversations began to unfurl like the delicate branches of a blooming tree, cautiously at first, but blooming all the same. We spoke of her absence without wading through bitterness. We spoke of my childhood without the weight of unresolved shadows. Each word felt like a brushstroke painting a clearer picture of two flawed and fragile beings who found a way back to each other. The moments were punctuated by snatches of holiday songs, our voices blending in harmony and discord, with the lyrics evading us but our spirits dancing freely. One evening, as we curled up on the couch watching old family videos, tiny glimpses into a world that felt both distant and achingly close, I caught her looking at me, a reflection of tenderness and vulnerability in her eyes. She softly admitted she regretted the years lost, yet I saw a flicker of something else, an understanding that our shared laughter and love had the power to bridge even the deepest divides. Those unspoken truths seemed to shimmer in the air between us, invisible threads weaving a tapestry of renewed trust. She expressed gratitude for my patience, which felt oddly reversed. My heart was grateful too, but for her presence, for her willingness to try anew. Each conversation, each short-lived tiff was a reminder that we were slowly threading together the fragments of our old selves with the new ones we were forging. Evenings turned into long discussions about dreams and aspirations, the soft glow of fairy lights glittering like possibilities in the air. Over dinner, we shared stories of our past and hopes for the future, anchoring our relationship in the open air of vulnerability. I felt a profound sense of comfort, her laughter filling the gaps of silence that had once felt like chasms. Sure, we weren't perfect, and perhaps we never would be, but we were learning to navigate this intricate dance of togetherness again. It was all still a work in progress, but as that holiday faded into memory, something undeniably beautiful emerged, a new rhythm that promised growth, however imperfect it might be. I realized that our bond was like those cookies we made, no longer pristine, but bursting with character, sweetness, and the warmth of shared experiences. It was deeply flawed, yet somehow, perfect in its own way. Reflecting on our journey, I understood that confronting the past was more than just a burden, it was a gift, and through those difficult conversations and tender moments, we both found a semblance of peace in the chaos. This tumultuous journey had changed us profoundly, but as I glanced at my mom, now more a friend than a figure of authority, I embraced the uncertainty of our future, knowing we were weaving a story that was all our own. There I was, standing in the corner of a dimly lit room, watching as people laughed and mingled, the soft thrum of music setting a carefree backdrop to the evening. It was supposed to be a fun night out, a chance for me to impress Melissa, my date, who had caught my eye a few weeks ago at the coffee shop where I worked. We had hit it off swiftly, sharing jokes and secrets over cups of steaming lattes, and on that Friday night, I felt hopeful that this party would deepen our connection. But a mere hour into the gathering, my excitement began to dwindle as a strange pit of disappointment settled in my stomach. I had made my way to the bar to grab water, feeling slightly parched from the small talk I had been engaging in. I turned to Melissa and asked if she would mind grabbing 2 glasses while I full-on chatted with a few friends who had arrived. With a playful smile, she agreed. Minutes passed, and I noticed her standing at the bar, chatting with some of her friends and completely neglecting my request. I could feel a sense of annoyance creeping up me. It wasn't that big of a favor. I mean, how hard was it to just fill a glass with water? When I finally got her attention, I decided to approach the bar myself, making my way through the warm crowd. I didn't want to make a scene, but as I reached the counter, claims of thirst whispered in my mind. When I returned with my 2 glasses, I found her laughing with a group, her head thrown back in mirth, showing no signs of having noticed my absence. I felt a mix of irritation and frustration clashing within me. Shouldn't she have cared that I was waiting? After all, if the roles were reversed, wouldn't I have done the same for her? I set the glasses down, approached her too calm demeanor, and quipped lightly, "Did you not hear me ask for water?" Her response was more flippant than I had anticipated, akin to waving a dismissive hand at a child's tantrum. "Chill out. It's just water. We're having fun, aren't we?" I had considered myself easygoing, perhaps even too easy at times, but this felt different. I wasn't just parched, I felt like an afterthought. I thought about trying to shrug it off, to laugh with her, and pretend her nonchalance didn't bother me. Yet that wasn't the case. Something deep inside tugged at me, urging me to pay attention to the growing fissure in our evening. "You wouldn't want to take water to someone else, would you?" Her chuckle faded. Clearly, I had struck a nerve, but instead of a calm discussion, I was met with her raised eyebrows and a tone that meant an impending storm. I felt my stomach churn as a deeper realization set in for me. This wasn't just about water, it felt like our dynamic was revealing an underlying issue. These clues stripped the evening of all its sweetness. I stepped away from the group, indicating I needed a breather. I felt guilt wash over me. I liked her. Was I really about to let a glass of water become the reason I'd leave? After taking a moment in the rear garden, surrounded by the muted sounds of the party drifting through the open door, something shifted. I didn't want to keep fighting for her attention. It stung, but leaving felt like reclaiming a small piece of my dignity. As I walked out, I glanced back at Melissa, immersed in her laughter, oblivious, and I realized that sometimes, situations highlight the disparities in how people value one another. I felt a bittersweet relief washing over me. Deep down, I knew this wasn't a friendship destined to grow. Later that night, as I lay sprawled in my room under softly glowing fairy lights, I reflected on what happened. Maybe I wasn't the biggest villain, perhaps it was time to revamp what I sought in relationships. Maybe my needs were simple but important, and if she couldn't meet them, or even acknowledge them, that was worth noting. That little moment revealed more about her indifference, and ultimately, I would rather spend my time with someone who wouldn't just quench my physical thirst, but my emotional one as well. Update: a few days passed, and Melissa texted me, casually asking when we could hang out again. I considered the message, my mind aligning all the reasons to say no. Instead, I replied honestly. I mentioned that I appreciated the good times but felt like we were on different wavelengths, and perhaps it was best to part ways. To my surprise, she responded quickly, expressing mild frustration but also acceptance. "I guess we just weren't meant to be," she replied, a little too nonchalantly. I sat there staring at my phone. Yes, it was bittersweet, but it also felt liberating, like I was finally setting my own boundaries, opening up space for someone who might just care enough to hand me a glass of water when I asked for it. I set my phone down, staring blankly at the room around me, filled with the soft hues of early evening light filtering through the sheer curtains. The silence seemed thicker now, as if the air had gained weight after our exchange. I found myself reflecting not only on that last date but on that entire week, the parties I had attended, the conversations that felt more like choreographed performances than genuine connections. My heart had pangs of loneliness even amidst laughter and chatter. It was all so superficial. I cherished depth, but depth seemed harder to find. I thought about that moment at the party when all I had wanted was a simple glass of water. It felt monumental then, a test of sorts. Would he care enough to step away from his own fun for just a minute to make sure I was comfortable? But instead, I had been met with uncomfortable laughter and a flippant brush-off, the kind of casual dismissal that stung far more deeply than anyone could have anticipated. As I wandered into the kitchen to make myself a cup of tea, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass of the cupboard door and winced. My eyes looked tired, a little sad. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for anyway. Some validation? Understanding? Or perhaps just a partner who saw me as I truly was, rather than a checklist they could tick off at a party. Sipping the warm tea, I tried to focus my thoughts. I could feel the echoes of their laughter still surrounding me, but rather than drown in it, I wanted to find a way out into the quiet. I wanted to rediscover myself in the silence. The next few days passed in a blur. I stayed busy, working through stacks of paperwork during the day, and on weekends, I buried myself in hobbies I had neglected. A long-forgotten passion for painting took precedence one afternoon as I dipped my brush into vibrant colors. Each stroke on the canvas seemed to soothe my restlessness, allowing buried emotions to flow out, a startling catharsis emerging from the swirl of blues and greens. Yet amid that serenity, I couldn't shake off the tangled cords of loneliness. Somewhere deep down, I still craved companionship, a connection that felt real. By the time I got the invite for a friend's upcoming birthday party, I hesitated, contemplating whether I should go. This time, however, the thought didn't fill me with dread. In fact, it carried a sense of anticipation. I dressed up that evening with a newfound liveliness. I chose an outfit that made me feel confident, a pair of bright, flowy pants and a top that shimmered just enough to catch the light. Maybe, with a little luck, I would meet someone who understood the value of communication, even for small things like water. It would be clear from the start that I wanted more, a dual respect that could blossom in little interactions. Once at the party, I first wandered toward the snack table, grabbing a few bites while scanning the crowd. I laughed as I recognized familiar faces and exchanged pleasantries. For the first time in a while, I felt weightless in my own skin, unburdened by expectations, both from myself and the people around me. Eventually, I found a quiet corner on the patio, where soft music fueled gentle conversations. I admired the way the stars began to twinkle above. It was mesmerizing, grounding, and perhaps inviting for possibilities. That's when she approached, Maya, an acquaintance from a mutual circle. She had a genuine smile that lit up her face, and her laughter resonated with warmth and candor. I was surprised at how easy it was to talk to her, as if we were old friends catching up. Mid-conversation, I asked her if I could grab a glass of water and, to my delight, she immediately grabbed mine and her cup matter-of-factly, sliding them both toward me without second-guessing. As she casually remarked how important hydration could be, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time since that last encounter, I felt seen, as if I had been handed a lifeline rather than just a drink. Over the next hour, we shared stories about life, quirky hobbies, travel dreams, and the absurdity of dating mishaps. I felt my heart lightening as I realized the conversation flowed effortlessly. There was no pretense, just two people connecting over shared experiences and laughter. It didn't matter if this led anywhere romantic, it was the dialogue and the companionship that felt renewing. Amidst all this, I could feel my earlier hesitations fading away, not because I feared being alone, but because here, in this little pocket of the universe, I knew I had worth, and I wouldn't settle for anything less. As the night wound down, we exchanged numbers, promising to stay in touch, both of us leaving perhaps with the potential for friendship or something deeper. Walking home under the starlit sky, I took a deep breath, a smile drawing across my lips. I didn't feel like I had lost it all, rather, I felt that I was finally starting to gain everything I wanted, not just in a partner, but also the self-assurance of knowing what I deserved. In the days that followed, I wondered if any of this would lead anywhere more than light-hearted chats over coffee. Still, the journey of rediscovering myself felt infinitely more significant than focusing on finding a romantic partner. As those weeks turned into months, each conversation with Maya, no matter how simple, helped build a foundation that eventually turned delightful, sometimes surprising. I realized it was always the little things that mattered, just like a glass of water did that night. I chuckled softly to myself, reflecting that maybe, finally, I had learned to navigate my own path, and perhaps I had even found someone who could walk alongside it, glass in hand, genuinely invested in more than just where life would lead us. And so, as I curled up on my couch one quiet evening, I felt a peace I hadn't encountered in a long time, and as I drifted off to sleep, I knew, I wasn't the asshole for leaving a party. If anything, I had made room for something far better than I had ever hoped for. The following weeks unfolded like a gentle sunrise, warm and promising. I took my time getting used to this new chapter. I was buoyed by my decision, and it sparked something within me, a renewed sense of self-worth that felt as refreshing as my long-awaited glass of water. I began to explore hobbies I had set aside for far too long, painting during the quiet afternoons, journaling under the naked branches of winter trees, and even experimenting with new recipes after a cold spell had made takeout an almost too recurrent theme. With each brushstroke or new ingredient, I felt greater clarity wash over me, like I was reclaiming pieces of myself that I didn't know were lost in the routine of trying to please others. Yet, while wallowing in my solitude, I found myself thinking about the deeper connections I craved. Sometimes, I'd scroll through my phone, catching snippets of conversations from my friends, discussing their heartbreaks or busy careers, which only reminded me that even in shared experiences, people saw the world so differently. It wasn't just about parties or social gatherings anymore, it was about feeling valued in the smallest acts, of someone genuinely listening to my needs. One crisp Saturday afternoon, I received a text from a friend I hadn't heard from in a long while. Jess always had the right level of kindness blended with mischief that made her captivating to be around. She wanted to know if I'd join her and a few others at a local coffee shop for an art festival starting next weekend. Memories of our spontaneous adventures flickered in my mind, and without hesitating this time, I agreed. The closer the date approached, the more I found myself alternating between excitement and apprehension. What if I froze again? What if someone needed something from me, and I felt constricted by the desire to appease? Those thoughts clung to me like shadows, but I understood they stemmed from the residual anxiety of that last party. And yet, how could I forge new memories without risking a little vulnerability? The day arrived, and the old coffee shop was even more enchanting than I remembered, with chunky vintage furniture and soft jazz humming in the background. The walls were adorned with local artists' works, vibrant colors splashed across canvases, each whispering a story I longed to dive into. Spotting Jess was easy, her laughter cut through the bustling chatter like sunlight piercing through the trees. We greeted each other with enthusiastic hugs and lingering eye contact that reassured me we were still on the same wavelength. As our group settled in, sipping on our drinks and discussing everything from art to dreams, I found solace in belonging. There was a comfort in the laughter, and despite my earlier reservations, I discovered how liberating it felt just to be seen and heard. Halfway through our gathering, I excused myself for a moment and made my way to the restroom. Glancing in the mirror, I smoothed down my hair and took a deep breath. I realized that I had spent too long doubting my worth, afraid of facing discomfort and potential heartbreak. As I returned to the table, I couldn't help but smile. I was welcomed back to the group with open arms, a seat saved beside Jess. The conversation flowed, laughter crescendoed, and someone even asked about my recent painting venture, prompting a glimmer of pride within me to share my latest piece. That evening turned into an impromptu art critique followed by plans to visit galleries around town. It felt like a tapestry of warmth was woven around us all, threading kindness, creativity, and understanding together. I left the venue feeling lighter, the tension that had momentarily wrapped around my chest uncoiling like the tendrils of dawn breaking through. As I drove home, the streetlights flickering past, I reflected on the day, a mosaic of rekindled friendships, laughter shared over cappuccinos, and the beauty of allowing myself to step outside of what once felt like looming shadows. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be genuinely present with others and myself. I realized I didn't have to mold myself into someone's ideal collection of traits to find companionship. I simply needed to allow myself to exist as I was. Looking at the horizon ahead of me, painted in nothing but the gentle hues of twilight, I whispered to myself, I'm not the asshole for leaving that party, but rather, I am the architect of my own journey, and finally, I could feel that faint hope blossoming with every step I took. I always believed that morality was a sliding scale, a gradient of gray rather than a rigid line between right and wrong, but it wasn't until the day that changed everything for me that I truly understood just how complex human choices could be. My name is Ava, a 35-year-old graphic designer living in a small town where everyone knows everyone else's business. Recently, I found myself at a crossroads when it came to my best friend, Megan, and her escalating issues with her husband, Jason, who I had known for nearly as long as I had known her. It all started when I noticed subtle changes in Megan's demeanor. She had become quieter, more withdrawn, often distracted during our weekly brunches. After weeks of gentle nudging and concern, she finally opened up, revealing that Jason had begun to act possessive and controlling, belittling her in front of her friends and limiting her contact with us. The moment she confessed her struggles, a knot twisted tightly in my stomach. I could feel her pain, and the urge to confront Jason, to protect my friend, bubbled just under the surface. However, as Megan continued to share her story, I realized how deeply complicated the situation was. She still loved Jason, and despite his flaws, they had a life together that she didn't want to destroy. Still, as the weeks passed and her distress deepened, I became increasingly torn. Was it right to stand by silently while she suffered? I longed to speak out, to hold Jason accountable, but with each passing day, the thought of confronting him seemed more daunting than liberating. Picking up my phone, I considered reaching out to Jason for coffee under the pretense of catching up. But the idea of sitting across from him, feigning ignorance about the turmoil he was causing, made me feel dirty. It felt like betrayal, not just to him, but to Megan. Yet, I grappled with the fact that doing nothing felt like I was enabling his behavior. One night, I finally decided to vent my frustrations on an online forum dedicated to relationships and moral dilemmas, posting under the title AITA for refusing to do the morally correct thing. Writing it out helped, but circulating the thoughts in my mind only made the burden heavier. I didn't know what was right or wrong anymore, only that I was scared for Megan, scared for what might happen if I brought everything out into the open. Unlike most stories, mine did not fit into neat categories of good versus bad, hero versus villain. It was just a messy reality waiting to implode. Before I knew it, another few weeks slid by. Frustration began to bubble beneath my surface, tempered only by glimmers of hope as I observed Megan gradually reclaiming her voice, taking up yoga classes, meeting friends, and laughing again. However, amidst these moments of brightness, Jason still lurked in the background, his shadows looming heavier. One evening, while we were wrapping up dinner, Megan received a text that left her pale and shaking. It was Jason, apoplectic with jealousy over something trivial, her liking a post from an old friend on social media. I could see her teetering on the edge, like a bird testing the wind before flight. Thoughts warred inside me: should I step in, remind her of the strength she had shown in the past few weeks, or should I keep my mouth shut and simply be the supportive friend while allowing her to navigate her feelings? I felt like I was watching a train wreck in slow motion. Eventually, I did what I had dreaded most: I reached out to Jason. My heart pounded as I crafted a message, not to accuse him, but to express genuine concern for both him and Megan. My intention was to balance compassion with clarity, but I was met with rage and denial. I wondered if I had opened a Pandora's box that could not be closed. When he accused me of trying to drive a wedge between them, I realized the irony of my position. In my attempt to do the right thing, I had unwittingly made myself the antagonist. In the following weeks, Megan confronted me after discovering my message to him. Her eyes, usually filled with warmth, were clouded with disappointment. I struggled to articulate my intentions, the care and worry I felt, but her heart was set on defending Jason, framing my actions as indiscriminate meddling. I had breached her trust, and suddenly, I felt like I was losing her all over again. Soon after, she distanced herself from me, creating a chasm between us that I feared was too wide to bridge. Yet, time has a funny way of softening the most jagged edges of our hearts. A few months later, I received a text from Megan, a single sentence that shattered the silence: "I think I need to talk." When we met, the weight of our shared silence was palpable. Megan spoke of her feelings suffocating her, sprouting roots in the cracks of their relationship. She had grown disenchanted with Jason's behavior but felt trapped by her own heart, still fiercely in love but desiring independence. I listened intently as she unpacked her turmoil, aware that she was wrestling with the very emotions I once feared might consume her. This time, rather than leading with what I had wanted her to do, I became merely a vessel for her thoughts. In that moment, a wave of relief washed over me. Perhaps refusal to act decisively that day was not weakness but a necessary pause, allowing her to process her own feelings. By simply listening, I had helped her find the strength she inadvertently carried all along. In the months that followed, Megan started seeing a therapist and began to slowly reclaim her autonomy. They eventually parted ways, but to my joy, that didn't sever our friendship. Instead, it brought us closer as she learned to trust again, both in herself and in me. Now, whenever I revisit that challenging time, I reflect on how morality sometimes presents itself as a confusing puzzle, one where context molds our decisions, and perhaps my hesitation was the quiet space she needed to arrive at her own truth. As for Jason, he remains a specter in our past. While I refuse to vilify him, I recognize that some lessons require a deeper understanding of ourselves before we can act. I find comfort in knowing that we each navigate our paths at our own pace, learning that sometimes, the morally correct choice is simply to let someone discover their own strength. As I sit here, wrapped in the warmth of late afternoon sunlight streaming through my window, the peaceful hush of the neighborhood outside reminds me how far we've come since that turbulent chapter of our lives. My thoughts drift to the last moments we shared as a group before everything spiraled, an innocent dinner gathering where laughter danced around the table like light refracted through crystal, our conversations punctuated by the clinking of wine glasses and the steady simmer of rich tomato sauce in the kitchen. It was on that evening that I first sensed the underlying tension, the unspoken rift between Elizabeth and Jason that hung in the air like a fragile thread, barely visible but undeniably there. I remember glancing at Elizabeth, her smile a facade that cracked ever so slightly when Jason cracked his usual self-deprecating joke, an enthusiastic quip that drew a round of laughter but which I saw, in her eyes, was tinged with something deeper, disappointment, maybe, or a yearning for a connection that felt just out of reach. I had always been a firm believer in the importance of open communication, and I felt an instinctual urge to navigate the storm building between them, Yet here I was, paralyzed by the weight of their love and conflict. Would I really be the one to pry it open, to force them into confrontation when perhaps Elizabeth needed to discover her limits in her own time? My heart whispered that sometimes intervention doesn't aid evolution, instead, it risks suffocating the growth that must occur organically. After Jason's sudden departure from our lives, the quiet stretched into a painful silence. Elizabeth threw herself into her art, creating with a fervor I hadn't seen before, colors splattering against canvas like the release she craved but couldn't express in words. Each brushstroke seemed to channel her pain, a cathartic reminder of resilience. I found solace in the idea that in allowing her to navigate her relationship with him, unlike the casual judgments thrown down from others in our circle, I had played an understated role in her journey of self-discovery. It was an odd comfort, knowing I had stood back, letting the fragile threads of her choices bind her together, even if the process left a knot in my own stomach. Some nights, we would sit on my cramped balcony, my old wind chimes tinkling softly in the breeze as the stars blinked like whispers overhead, and I would ask her, "Are you feeling okay?" Each word laced with genuine curiosity, waiting for her revealing truths. "Not yet," she'd reply softly, her gaze drawn to the cosmos, "but I'm figuring it out." There was something about those words, the way they hung in the air, heavy with unexpressed emotions, that settled an uneasy peace within me. I began to understand that the morally correct thing might not fray the edges of our friendships or force open wounds that needed time to heal. Instead, perhaps it simply meant stepping aside, guiding someone gently towards the door, and trusting they'd find their own way back to the light. Months passed, and I reveled in the small milestones, her laughter ringing out clearer, her sunsets painted with hope rather than sorrow. Each moment unfurled like petals in spring, moving us away from Jason's shadow and closer to a rediscovered autonomy. I would hear stories from mutual friends about where his life had wandered, the detours and dead ends that always intermingled with success. He became some mythic figure in the background of our lives. But it was strange how I could feel sympathy for him, too, an understanding that his decisions led him down a different, perhaps narrower path, even if they had hurt Elizabeth deeply. One evening, as we sat together on my balcony again, the sounds of distant laughter and music wafting through the complex, I found myself revealing my own struggles, my moments of indecision, the fears I had held tight like a lucky charm. Elizabeth listened, eyes bright and absorbing every word, and I could see the transformation within her had given her strength to bear my vulnerabilities without judgment. It felt freeing, this exchange of burdens. After all those months of navigating her own tumult, she offered in return a tender reassurance. "You're not wrong for wanting to be the good guy, you know. Just remember, sometimes being the good guy means knowing how to step back, too." In that quiet moment, surrounded by a galaxy spilling its secrets, I could finally let myself smile. I understood then that we are taught about right and wrong, but the grayness in between is where true morality thrives, in friendship, in support, and in allowing our loved ones to find their own light. As I write this reflection of our past, I can't help but think about the cascading ripples we leave in our wake, and how, even amid the tumult, learning to foster resilience can guide us through the murk toward clarity. I'm grateful for Elizabeth and the strength we both found in our friendship, a space that flourished as we chose patience over pressure and acceptance over judgment. Perhaps the heart of this journey is just that, trusting the quiet strength we each possess, the intricacies of human connection woven into our very souls, reminding us how important it is to navigate our own truths. As I contemplate our journey, I feel the warmth of the afternoon sun filtering through the window, casting gentle patterns across the wooden floor. It's a peaceful scene, yet it's tinged with the weight of what we've both endured. Elizabeth and I have always been the kinds of friends who could spend hours tethered to each other's thoughts, sharing our stories over cups of herbal tea in that little cafe downtown, a sanctuary filled with the soft hum of conversations and the aroma of freshly baked pastries. It was there, between discussions of our dreams and fears, that we confronted the shadow of Jason, an enigmatic figure who once filled our lives with chaos. I remember that day vividly, the one when Elizabeth finally shared the truth she had carefully hidden, her voice barely above a whisper as she recounted moments of vulnerability, moments where Jason had chipped away at her self-worth with a snake's charm, always promising love yet delivering heartbreak. Listening to her pains felt like holding the last petal of a wilting flower, fragile and poignant. I wanted to rush in and fix everything, to demand she cut ties with him and reclaim her voice, but instead, I sensed a deeper truth spiraling within her, a truth she needed to discover for herself. I reassured her, my tone steady and calm, reminding her that real strength comes not from action alone, but from understanding one's own choices and standing firm in their wake. As the days turned into weeks, our dialogues evolved. Elizabeth began to unravel inside herself, peeling back layers that I didn't even realize weighed so heavily on her heart. I offered my support, a steady presence as she moved beyond what had been buried in shame and doubt, navigating the landscape of her identity. She poured her anger and confusion into her art, transforming pain into bursts of color that vibrated with the life she was reclaiming. I watched in awe as she began to bloom like the wildflowers in spring, each brushstroke a testament to her resilience. During these pivotal moments, I often found myself wrestling with my decisions. Was I doing the morally correct thing by allowing her to wander through this messy journey without directing her? I questioned whether by standing back, I was somehow failing her, but deep down, I recognized that my role was not to be her knight rescuing her from the dragon, but rather the quiet guide who opened the door to her own fortress. This reflection echoed back to the reality that sometimes love means granting the agency to those we care for, allowing them the space to face truths that would ultimately lead to their liberation. In observing Elizabeth transform, I realized her process mirrored my own in profound ways. There were moments in my past, especially in my own relationships, where I sought to remain complicit rather than confrontation, choosing the path of least resistance over the arduous climb toward honesty. Eventually, she came to a decision late one evening. I could see it in the light flickering behind her eyes as we met at our usual spot. She was filled with a kind of quiet determination, reflecting the hues of a sunset surrendering to twilight. I told him it was over, she said, her voice steady as if she were confirming an appointment rather than ending a significant chapter of her life. In that moment, I felt a swell of pride for her, a deep recognition of the strength that had always resided within her. There was fear and sadness, yes, but there was also freedom, a shedding of burdens that she never deserved to carry. We sat there for a while, letting the silence envelop us like an embrace, both savoring her brave leap into the unknown. As I look back now, it's almost surreal how life unraveled. Months pass in a wash of colors, yet the vibrant patterns of our friendship remained anchored amidst the chaos. Elizabeth blossomed in ways I had never anticipated. She began giving talks at local art galleries, exploring themes of resilience and self-discovery, while I took to writing, chronicling our journey and its lessons. The landscape of our lives was no longer cluttered with remnants of the past but infused with hope and new beginnings. We learned that the morally correct path isn't always straightforward. It can lead you through uncharted territories, revealing nuances of strength hidden in vulnerability. Reflecting on our experience, I understand now that surrendering to the complexities of human emotion is a necessity. Rather than simply navigating the seas of righteousness, we embrace the ebb and flow of life and relationships, allowing ourselves to anchor in our truths. As I pour my thoughts onto paper, I find solace in this realization. There's a quiet beauty in patience, a strength in allowing others to find their own way, and perhaps the moral compass we seek often points inward, guiding us through the tides of our own existence. And though the future will always remain uncertain, I find strength in knowing that both Elizabeth and I have learned not just to face the storms but to dance in the rain, celebrating every moment of clarity that follows. As I close this chapter, I feel a gentle warmth within, a reminder that life is but a series of interconnected stories waiting to be shared and understood. In this shared understanding, I find comfort, and perhaps, in our own little way, we are each entitled to navigate the moral dilemmas of our lives, trusting in our ability to find meaning and growth. It was a crisp winter morning when my son and I arrived at the slopes, the air sharp and invigorating, promising a day filled with laughter and the thrill of gliding down glistening white hills. My son, Ethan, had only started skiing a couple of months prior but was already captivated by the sport. His enthusiasm was infectious. As a single parent, I cherished these moments spent together, feeling the weight of life melt away with each laugh as we bundled up against the cold. The excitement in his little voice as he beckoned me to a gentler slope warmed my heart. I watched him transform from a cautious beginner into a spirited skier. But as morning gave way to afternoon and we found ourselves at the base of a moderate hill, ready to take on a new challenge, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Ethan, energized by the promise of adventure, shot off ahead of me, his red helmet bobbing in the distance while I followed cautiously, knowing that he needed space to explore but also keeping a watchful eye on his technique. That's when I saw him, a man with a smug expression and a bright orange ski jacket, barreling down the hill. I initially mistook him for simply a confident skier, but I soon realized he had little regard for those around him. As if determined to prove his prowess, he sidestepped Ethan's path as they met in a tumble of limbs and sharp edges. I felt my heart drop as I watched Ethan crumple to the snowy ground, a frightened look on his face. Before I could reach him, the man clumsily skidded to a stop, his attention unfocused as he turned to check his own gear rather than caring for the child he had just collided with. I rushed over, my heart racing, and knelt beside Ethan, my hands brushing against the cold snow as I surveyed him for injuries. Thankfully, he appeared unharmed, but the tears welling up in his eyes rattled me more than any physical ailment could. Anger simmered just beneath the surface as I glanced at the man, who was now sauntering away, clearly unconcerned about the aftermath of his recklessness. "Are you okay, buddy?" I asked Ethan gently, my voice trembling with a mix of relief and rising fury at the man's arrogance. Yet the sting of humiliation mingled with my protective instincts. Was it overreacting to call ski patrol on someone who had scared my child? As I comforted Ethan, I could see he was growing more distressed by the second, overwhelmed by the sudden chaos of the moment. I took a breath and made the call. While waiting for the patrol to arrive, I watched the man laugh and joke with his friends nearby as if Ethan's experience was an amusing side note. The urge to confront him was palpable, but fear held me back, wondering if turning this into a spectacle would only upset Ethan more. The ski patrol arrived relatively quickly, assessing the situation with calm professionalism while I explained what had happened and how the man had disappeared into the background of the day, leaving a ripple of anxiety in his wake. They assured me Ethan was safe and that they would handle the matter, which left me feeling both relieved and a little uncertain about whether I had crossed a line. After they dealt with the incident, Ethan and I decided to take a break, curling up at a nearby cabin with steaming mugs of hot cocoa. As we sat there, I watched him slowly return to his bubbly self, animatedly discussing how he wanted to tackle the next slope while I mentally sifted through my choices. Had I been too harsh? Did intervening really matter? The warmth of the drink settled over me as Ethan's laughter filled the air. My heart was still heavy, but the fuller sense of parental protection began to outweigh it. When we returned to the slopes, I kept him close, monitoring every wave of excitement or fear reflected on his face. The thought could not help but linger: should I have chosen a different route? The incident haunted me, a nagging feeling not just of vigilance but of questioning my decisions, stacking against the joy of our day. That evening, while tucking Ethan into bed, I finally asked him what he thought about the day, and he smiled brightly, recounting the delicious cocoa and the fun of trying out new runs. "Did you see how I turned my skis to avoid that giant snow bump?" he asked. Relief washed over me. Perhaps in the midst of chaos, our little adventures had forged lessons that neither of us would forget. Updates floated through my mind as I reflected on the afternoon, pondering about talking to someone at the lodge about safety for the kids but largely trusting that the ski patrol had taken appropriate action. The next morning, I sat idly, scrolling through a local social media forum when I stumbled upon a post titled something like "AITA for being a reckless skier?" The familiar orange jacket leapt off the screen. It was the man from the previous day, recounting the incident but portraying himself as a misunderstood thrill seeker who had been wronged. I chuckled softly and felt a wave of empowerment wash over me, reinforcing that I did the right thing for my son. The story rolled through my mind as I sipped my coffee. Life was often a toss-up of what's right or wrong, but when it involved safeguarding my child, I knew I'd take the ski patrol every time. As I sat there, watching the steam rise from my mug, my thoughts danced between the warmth of the cafe and the icy chaos of yesterday's events. The mountain air clung to me still, its crispness a sharp reminder of that too-close encounter. My son, Jason, had been so excited to hit the slopes for the first time. The anticipation was evident in his wide-eyed, bouncing energy as we strapped on our skis, the bright sun glistening off the powdery white snow. I had watched him glide cautiously at first, a little awkward but admirable in his determination. I couldn't help but grin as he cautiously maneuvered between the ever-present shadows of seasoned skiers. That grin had faded quickly when the orange-clad man hurtled down the mountain like a rogue missile, his skis gleaming with reckless intentions. There was no slowing down, no effort to avoid my son, and the moment became a blur. I remember calling out, but my voice was swallowed by the wind as Jason was knocked off his feet, landing with an audible thud, his little body tumbling into a snowdrift. The panic that washed over me was paralyzing. I rushed to my boy, my heart hammering, unwilling to look away from the damage that could have been done. Thankfully, he just had a couple of bruises that would fade, but the feeling of fear lingered long after. As ski patrol whisked the man away, their disbelief mirrored my own. He was so enthralled by the thrill of skiing that he had overlooked his responsibility to other skiers. The disbelief turned into anger when I saw him posting about the incident online, morphing the narrative to paint himself as a victim instead of the man who had charged through a family day like a bull in a china shop. It made my blood boil, that arrogant dismissal of consequence. I pondered whether I was too quick to call ski patrol, but my internal mantra of protectiveness soothed my guilt. I had acted out of fierce love for my son. That night, I spoke to Jason about the importance of safety and respect on the slopes. He nodded, his bright spirit unscathed by the day's events. "Dad, he just didn't see me. I still want to ski," he declared, determination lining his young brow. A mixture of pride and fear twisted in my chest. A kind of courage blossomed in him that I deeply admired, even if it made my heart race with worry. As days passed, I kept peeking into the online forums where the orange jacket guy had been, watching him twist words to become a skiing legend when he was just a reckless distraction. Then, something shifted, the comments began taking a turn. More skiers echoed our experience, pointing out his reckless behavior and demanding accountability. It felt comforting to know that I wasn't alone in my assessment. The twisted perspectives attempting to absolve his actions had no traction. It seemed everyone else saw it as clearly as I had. I even gathered the courage to participate, sharing how his actions had endangered my son and that safety should always trump thrill-seeking thrills. Months later, as I skimmed through the old posts, I reached one that caught my eye. AITA for apologizing to a parent after reflecting on my reckless skiing? It was the same orange jacket, though this time the tone was remorseful. The author spoke candidly about self-reflection and growth since that fateful day. I couldn't help but shake my head, the past merging awkwardly with the present. Though it was gratifying to see someone take accountability, a part of me resented the years lost to careless decisions. I closed my laptop and turned my gaze into the depth of winter as it changed to dusk. Jason was at the window, captivated by the falling snow, his laughter a bright star amidst the swirling white. Perhaps life was less about the transgressions of others and more about how we chose to love and nurture, to build characters and let them shine. The glow in my son's eyes was enough to make me forget the orange jacket and all it represented. The love I held for him ignited my understanding that we all fall, we all learn, and sometimes we must confront the slopes for the world to truly thrive. As the evening settled in and the warmth of the fireplace flickered shadows on the walls, I found a sense of calm wrap around me, interlaced with the soothing sounds of the crackling logs. I watched Jason dance around the room, his little feet gliding over the polished wood like they had learned to ski themselves, each movement a testament to unbridled joy. It was in these quiet moments, away from the chaos of the ski slopes and the bitterness of confrontation, that I found clarity. The way he playfully mimicked the ski patrol with a makeshift rescue backboard, a cushion from the couch draped over his shoulders, made me smile. My heart warmed with the thought that the incident on the slopes, while harrowing, had embedded itself in a lesson of safety and respect that I hoped would shape Jason's adventures in the years to come. With a steaming mug of cocoa in hand, I settled into the couch, letting the aroma wrap around me like a cozy blanket. My phone vibrated, and I instinctively grabbed it, half expecting another distasteful rant from the orange-jacketed antagonist. Instead, it was a notification from Reddit. Jason's antics had drawn the attention of my post, a flurry of comments that ranged from supportive to downright accusatory. I chuckled softly, reminded of how the public realm could partition experiences so neatly into heroes and villains, spectator and participator. But as I read through the comments, a sense of community enveloped me. Many echoed my thoughts, recognizing that in the world of parenting, we don't always have time for gray areas. Suddenly, my musings were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. I glanced towards Jason, who had momentarily halted his playful theatrics, curiosity gleaming in his eyes. I opened the door to find Leah, our neighbor, with her 2 kids, bundled up against the cold. "We heard you had hot cocoa," she said, grinning widely. Her laughter melded with the sounds of snowfall, brightening our home even more. The kids rushed in, their cold cheeks rosy and eyes sparkling. Jason's laughter reignited as he pulled them into his playtime adventure, and the atmosphere shifted. In the midst of our newfound gathering, I realized that life's slopes could be treacherous, but they also gave rise to moments of incredible joy and connection. I welcomed Leah and her children, brewed fresh cocoa, and chuckled as they retold their ski adventures and mishaps. Each tale unfolded as gently as the snowflakes twirling outside, a reminder of how laughter and camaraderie could soften the sharp edges of an unfortunate day. As the night progressed, we worked together to build a fort with blankets and pillows, creating a sanctuary of laughter in our living room. I could see how these interactions knitted the fabric of community and camaraderie, and I forgot the weight of the perpetrator's orange jacket as I engaged with the now familiar chaos. Every fit of giggles, every slight mischief, and even the way the kids tossed snowballs wove a thread of warmth that contrasted against the chilly world outside, reminding me that while I had stood firm on the slopes, ensuring my son's safety, my real battle was here, fostering a space free of judgment and full of love. The evening dragged on, fading into night, with stories exchanged and cocoa cups emptied. Just as I was beginning to feel drowsy, my phone buzzed again. The thread on my earlier post had exploded with notifications. I glanced at the screen with fatigue but curiosity. More stories shared, sympathies and remembrances of their own cultish orange jacket encounters, and unexpected words of encouragement. One comment, in particular, struck me: every time you stand up for your child, the world gets a little bit brighter. I smiled, taking a deep breath. It felt like a love letter to every parent grappling with their role in protecting their children amidst the unforgiving terrain of the world. Settled back into the couch, I closed my eyes, letting the sounds of laughter swirl around me like the snow outside, enveloping me in a cocoon of warmth. I realized that we must all navigate our slopes, but what mattered more than the falls or daring escapes was how we choose to love, nurture, and advocate for those we hold dear. That night, as Jason drifted off to sleep surrounded by remnants of his excitement, I too surrendered to the calm of the moment, feeling reassured that each step I took for him was a step towards fostering resilience and strength, something I hoped would carry him even beyond the ski slopes. The hum of chatter filled the classroom, punctuated by the clinking of chairs and the rustle of notebooks, but I was lost in my thoughts, my fingers idly tracing the smooth surface of my desk. My name, Kieran, a beautiful name that held stories of my heritage, was a constant source of comfort for me. It was a reminder of where I came from, my family's roots in India, and the rich culture that shaped my identity. Yet, as I sat there surrounded by my classmates, I could feel the familiar weight of unease settling on my shoulders. Since starting high school in the United States, I had faced the same question from my peers over and over again: why don't you pick an American name? At first, I would laugh it off, shrugging my shoulders as if it were no big deal. But as the months went by, the well-meaning suggestions became more persistent, and I started to dread the conversations. Each request felt like a tiny chip at my identity, a subtle push toward becoming someone I wasn't. One dull September afternoon, the teacher announced a group project. The moment my classmates began to huddle together, brainstorming catchy names for their teams, I felt the tension rise in my chest. I had always been an observer, preferring to listen rather than speak up, but today, something shifted inside me. As the laughter and suggestions bounced around the room, I finally exhaled a deep breath, mustering the courage to say, I don't want an American name. The words wobbled as they escaped my lips, but the room fell silent. I could see the surprise etched on their faces, momentary confusion mixed with pity. My friend Sarah, who had always been supportive, looked at me with wide eyes. Why not, though? It would be so much easier for everyone. Her voice was soft, but I could hear the underlying judgment. Because it's my name. It's who I am, I replied, my cheeks flushing. The room shifted slightly, and I could sense a mix of discomfort and curiosity splashing through the group. I could feel my heart pounding louder, the pressure of their stares weighing heavily on me, but I pressed on. I dove into the significance of my name, explaining the stories my grandmother used to tell me about my heritage, the richness that came with it. I shared how Kieran means ray of light, an embodiment of hope and inspiration in my culture. I felt a strange sense of liberation as I spoke. Perhaps I was finally asserting not just my identity but also my right to it. However, as the excitement of my declaration faded, the reactions shifted. Some classmates nodded along, and a few offered apologetic smiles, but I noticed others exchanging looks of bafflement as if they couldn't fathom why I didn't want to blend in. After class, Sarah approached me, her expression mixed with concern. I get it, Kieran, but think about it, everyone here has names you can hardly pronounce. Why wouldn't you want something that's easier for us to remember? Her insistence left me reeling. I had no intention of conforming to someone else's convenience. I felt an emotional surge of frustration mixed with sadness as I realized how hard it was for me to bridge this cultural gap among people I thought I could trust. As the week passed, I found myself pondering the reactions of my classmates, unsure if I had been too confrontational. A lingering doubt settled in my mind about whether I had made the right choice. The struggle became my silent companion, a shadow tugging at the corners of my thoughts. Then one evening, I received a message from Sarah, a simple apology for the way the conversation had turned that day. She expressed that she understood my perspective better now, and while she might not fully grasp my experience, she respected my choice. I felt a warmth wash over me as I read her words. Perhaps I hadn't lost my friends after all. The next day at school, I entered the cafeteria, hesitant about how my classmates would respond. To my surprise, several of them greeted me enthusiastically, "Kieran," they yelled as I walked in. A flicker of disbelief turned into a smile on my face. They had embraced my name, my identity. The earlier tension faded into a past I could learn from, setting the stage for deeper connections. So now, as I sit in this moment of beautiful uncertainty, I can't help but reflect on how vulnerability can carve pathways to empathy. It's an unexpectedly uplifting realization, knowing that my voice carries weight and that my identity is worthy of respect. I learned that standing firm in my truth not only affirmed who I was but allowed others to see me for it, too. Even though there would still be moments of doubt ahead, both about my identity and how it was perceived, I felt ready to embrace the journey. The idea of belonging is complicated, particularly in a world that often insists on conformity. Yet somehow, in carving out space for who I was, I found a flicker of light in the connection we all sought, a shared humanity draped in diverse stories. And perhaps, just maybe, my name was not just a label but a bridge connecting different experiences. Update: a few weeks later, I found out that Sarah started a project on names and their meanings for our school's cultural day. She reached out to me, asking if I would share my story and the significance of my name. This unexpected twist rekindled my excitement about cultural exchanges, allowing me to be an ambassador for understanding in our school. As I prepared my presentation, I felt an awe-inspiring sense of purpose swell inside me, reminding me that our names can pave the way for sharing, listening, and ultimately connecting with those around us, encouraging dialogues that burst with empathy and warmth. As the cultural day approached, I dove deep into the significance of my name, unraveling the threads of its history and the stories embedded within it. My name, Anais, is rooted in a tradition stretching back to my ancestors, resonating with layers of meaning that felt personal yet universal. I meticulously researched the etymology, the cultural contexts, and even the stories of other individuals who shared the name, finding comfort in the fact that the name was not only mine but a connection to many who walked similar paths before me. Each night, as I reviewed my notes by the soft glow of my desk lamp, I felt the anticipation build. It wasn't just a presentation. It was a chance to turn the tide of misunderstanding and perhaps inspire others to appreciate their own names and heritages. I designed a simple PowerPoint slideshow, featuring images of my family, pictures from cultural celebrations, and quotes that celebrated the beauty of diversity. On the day of the presentation, the auditorium buzzed with excitement. Students from every corner of the world shared their stories, and for the first time, it felt like I was part of something larger. When Sarah introduced me, I noticed her warm smile, and it grounded me in the moment. As I stood before my classmates, I looked out into their faces, many of whom I'd shared fleeting glances with in the past, but never truly connected to. I began by recounting the little anecdotes I had gathered about my family history, how my parents had chosen my name as a way to honor my heritage, and how it had shaped my identity. As I spoke, I could see a ripple of curiosity wash over the audience. Some leaned forward, while others exchanged glances of intrigue. I told them about that moment in the hallway that had unsettled me to my core, about feeling like an outsider simply because of my name. As the truth poured out, I felt an unexpected wave of vulnerability mixed with empowerment. Here I was, shedding my cloak of insecurity. As my presentation progressed, I encouraged my peers to share their own stories, creating a circle of respect and curiosity. One by one, hands raised high, revealing stories of names passed down through generations, and names chosen for their meanings. It became clear that while we were all unique, we also shared the same thread of seeking acceptance and connection that intertwined through our diverse backgrounds. I felt a renewed sense of camaraderie and community blossoming in the room though, which struck a profound chord in my heart. By the time I finished, I felt light, like I had released a burden I didn't even know I carried. The applause echoed, warm and sincere, and rather than purely congratulatory, it felt like a collective acknowledgement of the stories we all carried. In the following weeks, something beautiful began to unfold. My classmates, spurred on by the reactions from the presentation, started greeting each other by their names, spelling them out, sharing their meanings, and listening to each other with an attentiveness that hadn't existed before. It was as if my presentation had ignited a small cultural revolution in our school, a ripple effect of empathy and respect for the stories behind each name. Even Sarah and I grew closer. We chatted about our backgrounds often, a friendship flourishing through our differences. She even asked me to collaborate with her on a poster for next year's Cultural Day, which I happily agreed to. Reflecting on the journey we had taken, I realized that I had found my voice amidst the noise of uncertainty. The way my classmates began to see each other with more warmth, emphasizing real connection over preconceived notions, inspired me beyond words. This experience taught me that names, while they might carry the weight of identity, also bear the potency of understanding when we dare to search for meaning in them. Months later, as I watched friendships blossom and our school become a vibrant tapestry of cultures sharing their truths, I no longer felt like I was on the fringes. I was woven firmly into the fabric of our shared stories. I sometimes wondered what would have happened had I not pushed back at those moments of discomfort, and I knew that those moments had shaped me in ways I would reflect on for years to come. As I settle into bed each night, I feel grateful for the journey and those conversations we shared, threading together a deeper understanding of what it means to be both unique and connected. Update: a few weeks later, I was surprised to receive a message from a girl from another school. She explained how my story had traveled through social media, inspiring her to share her own name and its meaning in her school project. She thanked me for encouraging her to embrace her uniqueness and engage in dialogue about her culture. My heart swelled as I read her words, realizing that this ripple effect was much larger than I had ever imagined. Maybe, just maybe, our names serve not just as labels, but as bridges to a world more understanding and accepting. All we need to do is start the conversation. As her message lingered on my phone screen, I felt a new surge of motivation, a drive that pushed me to think even bigger about how I could spread this message of cultural appreciation and self-acceptance. Inspired by the girl's heartfelt words, I decided it was time to take my presentation beyond just my school. I wanted to open the door for others to share their stories too. I reached out to Sarah, who had ignited this journey for me, and proposed that we host a small event, an evening gathering where students could come together to talk about their names, share their heritage, and explore the significance behind cultural identity. To my delight, she was immediately on board, and we began brainstorming ideas that would make the event not only inclusive but also engaging. We settled on the theme names, our stories, our voices, and decided to create a cozy atmosphere filled with warm lights, cushions scattered on the floor, photos from our homes, and traditional snacks that represented various cultures. As word spread through the school, I placed an open invitation for students from neighboring schools to join us, eager for as many voices as possible to be heard. I poured my heart into crafting my presentation, aiming to highlight how names carry the weight of ancestral history and dreams, and how, through every pronunciation, we flick the pages of a wider narrative that we invite others to read. On the evening of the event, I stood at the entrance, my heart racing as I welcomed the first few students. My nervousness melted away as I noted the diverse faces filled with curiosity and anticipation. Students mingled, exchanging stories and laughter, while I observed a sense of connection weaving through the room, a tapestry made of words and shared experiences. As the gathering began, I took my place in the middle of the room, and as I shared my story, I could see nods and smiles affirming my words. It was a moment of pure magic. Everyone in the room seemed to connect on a level deeper than surface names. We were sharing pieces of ourselves. One by one, my classmates took turns sharing their own name stories, creating an unwavering atmosphere of encouragement. Some spoke of names laden with cultural significance, while others described the journey they'd taken in reclaiming or embracing their identities. I listened, entranced, as a shy boy revealed how his name, once a source of ridicule, now symbolized his family's resilience through generations. The event transformed into something monumental, a mosaic of voices each resonating with a unique timbre, wrapping around me in familiar warmth. As the night wore on, I realized this gathering had not been just an event, it was a reminder of the power we hold in sharing who we are. When it came time to close, I shared a few words of gratitude with the group, my heart full, acknowledging that every name told a story, their stories intertwined like threads in a larger fabric. Every participant walked away wearing not just their given names but also a newfound appreciation for their histories. A few days later, as I walked the school corridors, I couldn't help but notice how the atmosphere had slightly shifted. Conversations buzzed with a sense of openness, and I caught snippets of discussions about the importance of names and their meanings. One girl even approached me, shyly sharing that she had decided to embrace her traditional name instead of opting for a nickname. I felt a sense of pride, witnessing how one evening could spark such meaningful change. It was then that I recognized my voice had the power to inspire others, just as I had been inspired. Months passed, and that one event turned into a series of cultural dialogues at our school. From name stories to sharing family recipes, every gathering became a window into another world, creating a space where students felt seen and valued. It started as a simple exchange about names, but it grew to symbolize an acceptance of the beautiful diversity within our community. Reflecting back, I understood now that it was never merely about defending my name from being changed, it was about embracing identity. recognizing that our unique stories could carve paths toward understanding. I often think of that girl who reached out to me, knowing that the ripples of our words had the potential to flow far beyond what we could foresee. Thoughtful conversations about names led to deeper connections, and through that, a newfound sense of belonging took root, not just for me, but for many others, transforming our school's narrative into one of diverse elements woven into a vibrant fabric. As I sat at my desk one evening, contemplating the journey, I smiled at the thought, in a world often fraught with misunderstanding, all we truly needed was the courage to speak, to listen, and to share names that encapsulated our history as well as our aspirations for the future. Hiding my expensive shampoo and conditioner from my friend's guest wasn't a decision I took lightly, but as I stood in my small, dimly lit bathroom, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination swirling in my chest. I worked hard to earn the little luxuries in my life, especially my indulgent hair products that had become something of a personal ritual. To call them expensive seemed an understatement. They were a splurge, a treat for myself after months of saving and budgeting. My bathroom had always felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could retreat from the chaos of the outside world. I kept it meticulously organized, arranging everything on its shelves with care. But recently, a shadow had crossed the threshold of my sanctuary, Jess, my impulsive yet adventurous friend who had just moved into her new apartment. She invited me over often, and I loved spending time in her vibrant, chaotic space. However, Jess had this adorable but reckless knack for inviting people to stay over without asking, and her latest guest, Tara, seemed to embody all of Jess's wildest impulses. The first time Tara crashed at Jess's place, I was surprised at how quickly the two hit it off. Tara was a friend of a friend, someone I hadn't known well but instantly sensed was not particularly mindful of personal boundaries, especially when it came to possessions that didn't belong to her. When I learned she was staying for a few weeks, I started to feel uneasy, especially about my beloved shampoo and conditioner that I'd proudly displayed on my bathroom shelf. My routine had always included a lavish wash and condition cycle that lulled me into a sense of peace. I dreaded the idea of Tara, with her carelessness, pouring things out like they were a bottle of cheap soda. I couldn't help but imagine the horror of her washing her hair with my expensive products, treating them like mere souvenirs from the drugstore. Gradually, the creeping anxiety prompted me to act. One night, armed with the notion that this was, quite simply, my hair ritual we were talking about, I tucked both bottles away in the back corner of my closet, swaddled in soft towels, the equivalent of a security blanket. It felt a bit ridiculous, but as I tucked the last towel around them, a sense of relief washed over me like a soothing balm. I convinced myself this wasn't about being selfish, it was about protecting a cherished part of my routine. Yet, the first morning after doing so, a wave of guilt crashed over me. I knew Jess would find it odd if Tara expressed interest in trying to use my products and got no response. That guilt clung to me through breakfast, settling deep in my stomach as Jess happened to mention Tara's curiosity about my shower setup. A part of me wanted to say, "Oh, I hid my shampoo," but I never found the words. Instead, I casually brushed it off, hoping Jess would do the same. That evening, as I basked in my freshly cleaned hair, I overheard Jess telling Tara about my shampoo and conditioner. I felt my heart speed up. I knew she could have easily sought them out. The sheer panic coursing through me was further amplified when I overheard Tara excitedly asking if she could use them. Oh no, I thought, my heart sinking. My mind raced at the thought of my precious products being neglected, warped into a messy heap of potentially sticky hair. I knew I needed to keep them safe, to preserve my little corner of joy, but part of me felt like a villain for shutting my friend out from sharing in that joy. Weeks passed. I never let Tara close enough to my bathroom to even know what awaited her behind that perfectly organized door. Jess noticed my retreat into the bathroom, the strange avoidance of discussing products, and the unspoken tension grew. One afternoon, the gentle rain tapped on the window as we lounged on the couch, and Jess innocently broke the silence. "Why don't you like Tara?" After a long silence, I finally admitted the truth. I could feel my voice vibrating with anxiety as I explained everything, my fear, the guilty pleasure of my routine, and how I wanted to protect it from something outside of my control. Jess listened, her expression thoughtful. "It's okay to worry about your things, but you could have trusted me or Tara with it." I hadn't thought of it that way. It was a wake-up call, and even though I felt a weight lift off my chest, I still worried about how to turn around this small mountain of tension. That evening, I decided to take a step toward resolution. I apologized to Jess for hiding my shampoo and asked her to invite Tara to my place and share my routine with her. That night, I found myself pouring the leftover conditioner effortlessly into 2 fun little travel bottles, each adorned with tags from the local craft store. I felt a little silly but undeniably excited. As Jess and Tara cooed over the softness of my hair and products that now graced Tara's curls too, my heart swelled with an unexpected warmth. In that moment, the worry faded and revealed a simple truth: sometimes, sharing your treasures can create a bond far deeper than anything you could have imagined. I learned that night the importance of trust, and the joy that can spring from letting someone in. In time, Tara began to understand the reason behind my initial hesitation and even sought out her own version of expensive hair care, which made us laugh. It turned out the deeper conflict wasn't me being protective of my possessions but rather the challenge of allowing kindness and vulnerability to thrive in the face of anxiety. Update: a few months later, as we were all sprawled in Jess's living room post-movie, Tara casually remarked about how my products had been a game changer for her hair. A shared celebration emerged from that little mention, and in the light of her compliment, I realized my shampoo and conditioner had become a bridge rather than a barrier, strengthening the bond of friendship we had forged together. Just like that. The little pieces of my past no longer felt like possessions to guard, but instead reminders of how precious connections can be when fears are set aside. As the afternoon sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Jess's living room, casting gentle patterns on the floor, I found myself wrapped in a comfort I hadn't anticipated. The remnants of popcorn littered the coffee table, and the warm laughter of my friends mingled with the last fading echoes of the movie we had just finished watching. Jess, ever the host, had arranged an impressive spread of snacks, and the sweet familiarity in the air was both soothing and invigorating. Tara's passing comment about my luxurious shampoo and conditioner stirred something profound within me. I had always viewed my hair products as artifacts of exclusivity, treasures to be safeguarded like fragile relics from a past that felt so foreign now. I'd held so tightly to my fears about sharing them, fears that stemmed from memories of being laughed at for my tastes, or feeling out of place when unable to relate to the more frugal habits of others. Yet, sitting there, watching the joy spread across Tara's face as she spoke about how my products had transformed her hair, I realized that I had unwittingly constructed unnecessary walls around my treasures. Each game changer she recounted served as a testament to the bonds we were building, not just over hair care but over shared experiences and vulnerabilities. The tension in my chest, which once tightened at the thought of my belongings being under someone else's unappreciative gaze, began to dissolve like ice on a warm day. As the conversation flowed and we made plans for our next movie night, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. I was gradually learning that sharing a part of myself didn't deplete my identity; instead, it enriched the connection we had cultivated. It inspired me to reflect on my resistance to letting others in. I had spent so long afraid that my belongings might define me in ways I didn't want, when in actuality, they had become a thread in the fabric of our friendship, just like the conversations we shared about dreams, ambitions, and insecurities. In the weeks that followed, I began not only to share my shampoo and conditioner with Tara but also to be more open about my other passions. One evening, while we were sitting on the porch, I showed her my collection of rare vinyl records, each with a story behind it. Tara listened intently, her eyes sparkling with curiosity, and soon we were immersed in discussions about music that led us to swap recommendations and have deep conversations about the feelings that different albums evoked in us. I began to see my unique preferences, whether in hair care or music, as invitations rather than barriers, inviting connections where I might have otherwise been guarded. As these connections blossomed, it became clear that my journey was no longer just about overcoming anxiety; it had transformed into a celebration of shared experiences. My friends often joked about being product prescribers, each confidently recommending their go-to beauty secrets or stylistic tips, and with every laugh and playful criticism, I felt more at home. We even joked about hosting a hair care night where we'd explore different styles while trading our favorite products. It inspired me to create a cozy, safe space where everyone could come together, no longer just around possessions but around an openness to learn and share. Looking back, I realized that my initial instinct to hide my shampoo and conditioner had stemmed from a fear of vulnerability, yet here I was, a few months later, celebrating connections that had formed not in spite of my unique identity but because of it. I had found a community that cherished each other's quirks, welcoming all that made us who we are. This realization settled in my heart like a warm glow, reminding me that sometimes, the things we fear most about sharing are the very things that unlock a deeper understanding within our relationships. So, when Tara reminisced about that fateful day in Jess's living room, it wasn't just a compliment, It was that shared bridge, a memory that would always remind me of the importance of opening my heart and allowing friendship to weave its way into the fabric of my life. And as we all gathered again for those cozy movie nights, my heart swelled with gratitude, for I had learned that the most precious possessions of all are the bonds we cultivate and cherish with those we hold dear. Our evenings together soon became a ritual, a sanctuary filled with laughter, old movies, and the steady ebb and flow of conversation that deepened our friendships. Tara, with her infectious enthusiasm, often took the lead, introducing us to the latest comedies or nostalgic flicks from the 90s. Each time we settled in on the couch, popcorn in hand, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since I first met them. The little insecurities I had once clung to, my fear of losing my prized hair products or the jealousy I felt when Tara first used them, had transformed into a comfort, a reminder that vulnerability could be the cornerstone of connection. There was something about seeing Tara effortlessly toss her hair over her shoulder, the glossy shine catching the light like a beautifully woven thread connecting us all. One evening, after binge-watching a series, the topic shifted to future plans, dreams and aspirations, the kind that often linger in the quiet corners of our minds. Tara spoke of her ambition to start a blog about beauty and self-care, a project that had been simmering just beneath the surface. As she spoke, I felt a bubbling sense of pride for her, tinged with a familiar pull of envy. It seemed so effortless for her, proclaiming her passion to the world, while I'd always been apprehensive about sharing my own nuances with others. It was then that I remembered the first day she had borrowed my shampoo, the piano line of laughter spilling from her lips when I first revealed my stash, the way she had touched each bottle with reverence, as if holding a gem. After a thoughtful pause, I decided to share, a leap of faith that surprised even me. I opened up about my trepidation towards vulnerability and how I had kept my products hidden, all of it transforming into an opportunity to encourage her ambition. Tara listened, her expression shifting from curiosity to understanding, and as she did, Jess chimed in, sharing her own struggles with self-doubt. There was a flicker of realization in the air, an unspoken bond that connected the three of us through shared fears and expectations. For that brief moment, it felt as if I was peeling back the layers of a protective shell, bearing parts of myself that had long been closed off. As our conversation became more heartfelt, laughter mingling with a shared sense of vulnerability, I felt the weight of my earlier insecurities lift. It was a relief to acknowledge that we all had our ups and downs, insecurities and aspirations alike, and our friendship had become a safe space where we could lay it all bare. On that night, we forged a pact to not only support each other in achieving our dreams but also to celebrate our failures as part of this imperfect, beautiful tapestry we were weaving together. Weeks rolled into months, and soon Tara launched her blog, drawing from every laugh, every tear, and every awkward moment we had shared as friends. I watched her thrive, and with each updated post she published, I felt a part of that journey. She was my friend, and in her success, I celebrated my own triumph over my fears. That bond we formed wasn't just about my shampoo, it was a reflection of understanding, trust, and the beautiful messiness of life. In the quiet hours of the night, as I lay beneath the comforting weight of my blankets, I often found myself smiling, recalling the beginning of this incredible journey. The threads woven through friendship had become the very fabric of my existence, reminding me that every data point of insecurity dissolved in the glow of genuine connections. The profound lesson I learned, encased in the simplicity of shared moments over popcorn and laughter, was that authenticity in relationships can turn even our smallest concerns into a celebration of vulnerability, crafting a life that's rich not in possessions, but deep in love and understanding. And every time I reached for my bottles of shampoo and conditioner, I smiled, knowing they now served not just a personal ritual, but a reminder of the friendships I cherished and the bridges we had built together. It was a quiet evening when I sat down at my kitchen table, the faint smell of roasted vegetables still clinging to the air, a comforting reminder of the dinner I had enjoyed alone after a long day. I was scrolling through my phone when a message from an acquaintance, Anna, popped up, asking if she could come over for a casual get-together. My fingers hesitated over the screen, thoughts racing back to a party last month where Anna, with her bright smile and bubbly personality, made a bombastic introduction that was quickly overshadowed by her confession. She referred to herself as a total klepto. At the time, I had chuckled along with the other guests, brushing it off as a quirky exaggeration, but her subsequent actions raised hair on my neck. I watched, uneasy, as she slipped a bottle of wine into her bag and, just before leaving, rifled through my collection of vintage postcards while distracted by conversation. I knew I should have said something then. It would have been a golden opportunity for a teachable moment, but the laughter of friends masked my instincts as I let it slide. Now, As I read her message, I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. I typed a hesitant response, explaining that I had plans for the weekend and wouldn't be able to host her. Each word felt like a half-truth, a feeble wall I was trying to erect against an uninvited chaos. After sending it, I sank into an uneasy silence, replaying the moment she had look of glee when she thought no one was watching, a sort of childlike delight in taking things that weren't hers. The truth was, I didn't want that kind of energy in my home, a space I had worked hard to make a sanctuary. I loved the little treasures I had collected over the years, the mismatched teacups, the faded photographs, and the mere idea of them being subject to her klepto nature made me shudder. Days passed after my refusal, but the unease lingered like an unwelcoming guest. Our mutual friends began to ask about my decision. They wanted to know why I hadn't invited Anna, often couching their questions in a concern that felt almost mocking, as if I were the unreasonable one who had denied a friend simple hospitality. "It's just a joke, you know?" one of them remarked, laughter dancing at the edges of his voice as we stood by a fruity punch bowl. "You can't take it seriously." But I couldn't shake off the feeling. I started to wonder if I was being a bit too harsh, a bit too closed off, yet I felt the sting of their laughter in a way that didn't match my situation. Then came a text I hadn't anticipated. Anna reached out to me again, this time apologizing for her past behavior and inviting me to discuss it over coffee. A part of me wanted to engage, to hear her thoughts and perhaps offer her the understanding I had assumed she lacked. Yet another part remained on guard, caution spilling into the forefront of my mind, warning me of potential manipulation. I chose ambiguity, suggesting that we meet in a public space, something casual, allowing me to maintain the physical distance my heart craved. When the day came, we met in a quaint little cafe, the air thick with the smell of freshly baked pastries. Anna walked in, her demeanor had shifted, the confidence seemed tempered by uncertainty, her usual flamboyance stripped down to a fragile humility. She ordered a latte, and as our small talk veered into deeper waters, I found myself listening intently, her eyes pleading for comprehension, her remorse tinged with vulnerability. She spoke of her addiction, her battles with impulse control, her admission that the label klepto was more of a coping mechanism than a joke. I felt my own walls begin to crack, an understanding blossoming within the fissures of my guarded heart. It became evident that her light-hearted banter often masked a turbulent history, a story that I hadn't anticipated digging beneath the surface. I left that meeting not with a resolution but with a renewed sense of compassion towards someone I had judged too quickly. Maybe I wasn't the asshole after all, but perhaps I was merely wrapped in the confines of my own fears. Eventually, as I navigated my way through my own thoughts, I decided to reach out again. I recorded a message for Anna, saying I'd like to try again, inviting her for a small gathering with a few close friends. It felt right, a balance of caution and empathy, a tentative step toward bridging the space I had drawn between us. Several weeks later, I would look back at that moment of choosing to create a connection rather than a rift. I realized something profound about people. We are all carrying unseeable burdens, and sometimes, understanding is the most potent remedy we can offer. Update: a few months have passed since our reconnection, and Anna has slowly proven herself to be a dear friend, one who respects my space and has taken steps toward managing her impulses. She even surprised me at my birthday party with a thoughtful, hand-picked gift from my favorite bookstore, something I never would have thought possible when the conversation first unfolded in that cafe. As it turns out, both our experiences shaped a new port of calm in the stormy seas of uncertainty. It had reminded me that sometimes the most unsettling moments can lead to the strongest of bonds. As I reflect on the months that have passed since that pivotal decision, I can't help but marvel at how far Anna and I have come. There was a time when the thought of letting her into my life again felt risky, as if I were teetering on the edge of a cliff. It was easy to envision scenarios where her past tendencies would rear their heads, leading to a cascade of mistrust and awkward moments. However, I've come to understand that letting her in required a vulnerability I hadn't expected to offer, not just to her, but to myself. With each casual meeting, be it over coffee at our favorite little cafe or an impromptu movie night at my place, I noticed the subtle shifts. In our conversations, the laughter now echoed with a reserved familiarity rather than tension and caution. Anna sincerely worked on herself, eagerly sharing her progress and the strategies she was implementing to curb her impulses. Each time she showed up with a new accomplishment or insight, my heart melted just a bit more, swelling with awe for her courage and determination to change. One evening, as we curled up on my couch with blankets piled high and an array of snacks scattered around like a makeshift feast, our laughter filled the room, mingling seamlessly with the soft glow of the lamp casting golden shadows on the walls. It felt like home in a way I had nearly forgotten, a sanctuary where two people could be honest about their flaws without fear of judgment. I remember teasing her about her initial tendency to swipe something, a fine-looking postcard or a quirky pen, when she got overly excited. She playfully rolled her eyes, recounting a story about a time she had unintentionally taken an unusual clay figurine from a friend's house, only to return it a few days later, embarrassed and ashamed. We both laughed, and it struck me how that shared moment of vulnerability forged an even stronger connection. Her self-awareness illuminated a warmth in my heart. It was during one of those cozy evenings that I proposed we visit her old neighborhood, the neighborhood she had grown up in, just to see how things had changed. To my surprise, she agreed. As we strolled through the familiar streets, Anna pointed out buildings and shops, relaying stories from her childhood that were both endearing and bittersweet. There was a sense of nostalgia that enveloped us, and I could feel a deeper understanding blooming between us as we walked under the fluttering leaves of the trees lining the sidewalks. Anna spoke vividly about her dreams and aspirations, the very ones that had often been stifled by her earlier behavior, and in that moment, I glimpsed a new layer of her, the possibility of uncharted horizons, a future reshaped by newfound accountability. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Just last week, while I was out running errands, I received a frantic text from Anna, sharing how she had just been at a local busy store and felt drawn in by the rush of excitement, a familiar tension brewing within her. I could sense her panic through the screen as she admitted having slipped a decorative mug into her bag, her heart racing as she navigated the ethics of her actions in real time. My stomach twisted, I felt a flash of empathy mixed with fear. Part of me worried, was this my fault for encouraging her too much too quickly? Only moments passed before my phone buzzed again, and I read her message thanking me for being there. She confessed that when she reached her car, panic bubbled up inside her, urging her to overcome the old impulse, yet this time she chose differently. She pressed her palm against the mug, emerging as the person she aspired to be, her pulse steadying as she marched back inside to return it. I felt endless pride for her courage, and it served as a pivotal reminder of why I let her back into my life. Now, as I sit here reflecting on our journey, I realize how beautifully intertwined our lives have become. While Anna may carry the label of a total klepto in moments of levity, she is so much more than that one chapter. She is a testament to resilience, transforming an unsettling part of her identity into a space of growth and self-awareness. And who she is now, the person she has become, inspires kindness and connection in ways I genuinely didn't believe possible. Perhaps in forging a connection based on our mutual struggles, we inadvertently carved out a bond that scaffolded our souls in the chaos of living. As I look ahead, I can't help but feel curiosity for what lies down this uncharted path for us. Whatever it may be, together, we are embracing it. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting often on that crisp autumn day when Anna sat across from me in the little cafe, her admission hanging in the air like a caustic perfume. I had braced myself for the storm that conversation could have unleashed, but instead, it had gently nudged open the door to an unexpected friendship. One chilly evening, as golden leaves swirled around outside my window, Anna and I sat curled up in my living room, a stack of books scattered between us, the soft glow of fairy lights illuminating the cozy space. We were laughing about our most recent adventure, her brave decision to swap out her usual baked goods for fruit and nuts at a local market, a small victory in her ongoing journey of self-regulation. Each jest carried the weight of our shared laughter and love, a testament to how far she had come since our initial meeting. I watched her, marveling at the way her eyes sparkled with pride at her choices, something I often found myself nurturing in her as she shared anecdotes about her past mishaps. It was strange to think that just months prior, I had been wary of her presence, needing to protect my own space from the chaos of her admitted kleptomania. Yet here we were, two souls in tandem, navigating the bumps of our own imperfections. In the quiet moments, I could feel vulnerability wrap around us like a warm blanket, stitching together the tearing seams of our uncertainties. We talked about the moments that had defined us, her experiences reflected in mine, and it became clear that both of us had worn masks before finally discovering a safe haven in each other. There were still echoes of the past, rumblings beneath the surface that reminded us of our journeys. Sometimes, I would catch a flicker of darkness clouding her face, a shadow of temptation that whispered if only it could persuade her just once more. But instead of fear, I felt a rush of empathy swell inside me. I had seen her taking strides, how she carried around little reminders of her commitment, like a bracelet that she fidgeted with during tense moments, a grounding anchor amid her chaotic thoughts. These days, her voices of the past had transformed from torturous howls into whispered echoes of encouragement. We had both come to recognize that acceptance doesn't mean surrendering to our flaws, but rather, learning to dance with them amid the music of life, struggling less against the rhythm and finding our own beat. With every passing day, curiosity about our future mingled with uncertainty, a blend of excitement and trepidation that accompanied me whenever I thought of where this connection might lead. We began exploring new hobbies together, pottery classes that left our hands muddied yet creative, bookshop visits where conversations would tumble into the air like soft whispers. Each activity strengthened our bond, and it became increasingly hard to imagine my life without Anna's infectious laughter. One balmy winter evening, as we sat close in front of the flickering fireplace, our shared warmth seemed to wrap around us like the flames dancing in the hearth. Anna turned to me, her voice quiet but steady. "You know, I've learned so much from you, not to be afraid of the messy parts of our lives." I found that I had learned just as much from her, how authentic friendships could coax us out of our hidden corners and inspire bravery where we once only felt fear. It was then I realized what we were building together was not simply companionship, it felt like crafting a safe haven, a gathering point for two afraid hearts trying to rewrite their narratives. Still, as thoughts of what lay ahead lingered in the back of my mind, I understood that even within this sea of calm, the tides could shift with the slightest change. Our bond felt strong, almost etched in stone, yet challenges were part of life's intricate design, woven delicately into each sunset. As I nestled deeper into the warmth of our moments like these, I recognized that every twist in this journey would further color our story, each chapter rich with experience, growth, and perhaps an occasional storm. Yet through the tempest, I felt a newfound certainty that, no matter what, Anna and I were committed to weathering it together, brave enough to embrace whatever was waiting around the corner. In a world that sometimes feels strained by the clamor of differing tongues, I found myself at the center of a linguistic tug-of-war with my husband, Tom. I've always had a deep passion for the German language. It had been a part of my life since I was a child, nurtured by bedtime stories my grandmother would tell me in her lilting accent. When Tom and I met in college, I was amazed at how he soaked in those stories too, admiring my enthusiasm for a culture that seemed so distant to him, an American born and bred. Over the years, that admiration blossomed into love, but in the intimacy of our shared life, our once attractive differences began to fray at the edges. Tom studied German diligently for a while but soon found the nuances overwhelming, preferring to converse in the simple, comforting rhythms of English. But I loved to practice my German, and as the months slipped into years, it became my default language, a habitual comfort zone that I didn't realize was isolating him. One quiet evening after dinner, the familiar dance of our conversation took an unexpected turn when he asked me, gently but firmly, if I could refrain from speaking German at home as it sometimes made him feel excluded. The request struck me deeply. It felt like a rejection of a part of who I was, yet his eyes had that vulnerable glint that said he was struggling with his own feelings too. I was torn. Should I honor his request, sacrificing my linguistic flair for the sake of his comfort, or could I, in good conscience, continue speaking German, even if it meant detracting from our shared space? My thoughts churned that night, the shadows of self-doubt creeping in, mimicking our sad quiet as we ended the day. Was I the asshole for wanting to indulge in something that was such a part of me, or was I merely turning my back on a plea from the heart? Days turned into a strange dance of half-phrases in English and attempts at German that felt like a betrayal to the warmth and fluidity I thrived in. I saw flashes of disappointment in Tom's eyes each time I caught myself slipping back into my cherished words. It was an unnerving cycle. Each apology towards him felt like another nail in my own heart. The bright candlelight of our evenings dimmed, booths in our favorite restaurants filled with the silence of unspoken grievances. It wasn't until a particularly stormy night that we truly cracked open the chasm between us. Sitting in our living room, rain like a relentless drum on the roof, I finally laid bare my emotions. I told him how important it was for me to retain that part of my personality, that it felt as intrinsic to my being as breathing. And there in that cozy, rain-soaked space, our hearts opened wide, he admitted that while he loved me and admired my passion, he sometimes felt like he was on the outside looking in. It was a powerful exchange, raw and painful, but it was illuminated by an understanding that only deepened our bond. We spoke until the rain slowed, weaving through layers of our emotions, fears, and desires. By the end, we found a middle ground. We agreed that I could speak German during specific times, perhaps in moments of playfulness or passion, while committing to using English for our everyday conversations. It was a compromise born out of respect and love, a promise to nurture both my passion and his feelings. Months later, wrapped in the warmth of our love and mutual respect, I found joy in the sounds of both languages echoing through our home. I realized that love, like language, is best expressed in fluidity and understanding. We created our own little world, embracing a balance that felt harmonious, a beautiful cacophony of English conversations sprinkled with delightful German whispers. Sometimes, in those quiet moments, I catch Tom grinning when I slip into German to narrate a mundane event. It's a reassuring reminder that rather than diminishing our connection, my passion is woven seamlessly into our shared rhythm. It brings us closer, sparking late-night discussions about culture and identity, far more intimate than a mere exchange of words. As for my own internal conflict, it reshaped me into a partner who learned the beauty of compromise, whose heart echoes with gratitude for the understanding we carved from our differences. And on particularly slow afternoons, we sometimes find ourselves curled up with a book of German fairy tales, and for just a moment, the language that brought me to life becomes a bridge we walk hand in hand upon. However, our peaceful coexistence faced an unexpected challenge that I hadn't seen coming, and it started rather innocuously, with a flurry of messages from a close friend who was traveling to Germany. She was sending me pictures of charming villages, bustling markets, and the kind of enchanting landscapes that always called to my adventurous spirit. Each image ignited a longing within me, stirring the remnants of my passion for the language and culture as if I were being beckoned back to my roots. I found myself daydreaming about walking among the timber-framed houses of Rothenburg ob der Tauber, sipping coffee in a quaint cafe while laboriously picking apart the intricacies of my beloved language. With each ecstatic message I shared with my husband, Oliver, I ventured deeper into my reminiscing. But then a thought began to fester like a shadow in the back of my mind. I was slipping away from our shared language, and would that not create a rift again? In a moment that felt like a culmination of tension, I set my phone down and took a deep breath, deciding to tell him. One evening, while we prepared dinner, I casually mentioned how much I missed speaking German fluently. As I said those words, I felt the sparks that often flew between us dim just slightly. He cleared his throat, his back turned to me as the garlic sizzled in the pan. "You know it's hard for me when you speak that way," he replied softly, the uncharacteristic strain in his voice tinging my excitement with remorse. I felt the warmth of the kitchen wrap around us, but a chill crept into my heart. I could see where this was headed. I was about to dance on the edges of our previous discussions, tiptoeing around old insecurities. My mind raced as I weighed the prospect of expressing my desire against the well-worn caution of his sensitivity toward my enthusiasm. In his eyes, my love for the language sometimes felt like a conflation of identities, a risk that threatened to dilute the bond we had carefully rebuilt. It was never that he didn't appreciate the beauty of it, he just felt far removed from it, as if it were a melodious tune he couldn't fully hear. I offered a kind smile and said, "How about we practice together? Just a little? It might help us connect even more." For a moment, his shoulders dropped as if a weight had been lifted, and then that familiar tension began to creep back. "I don't want to feel left out," he said, a hint of defeat in his voice. It cut deep. I had unknowingly placed him into a familiar corner, a place that meant both of us retreading an old, risky narrative. Yet, this time, I saw an opportunity. Instead of focusing on our differences, I could bring him into my passion rather than pushing him away from it. I let silence envelop us, letting his thoughts swirl in the still air of the kitchen, and when it felt right, I proposed a solution. What if I spoke as fluently as I wanted, but also shared the meaning? I could help bridge the language too, like I did before. We could find a balance. Slowly, I watched as his frown morphed into thoughtfulness. "You truly want to bring me with you, don't you?" he asked with a cautious smile. "I do," I affirmed, the sincerity ringing in my heart, resonating through the air like the faint echo of a bell. Over the next few months, we began a new chapter together, one marked by our evenings spent in our cozy living room, dictionaries and notes sprawled around us, laughter punctuating the soft hum of our conversations. I shared with Oliver the stories behind the words, the richness of expressions and idioms that had once captivated me. I watched as his eyes lit up when unraveling the humor of a joke in German or realizing the affection imbued in a simple phrase. We even began to weave our private language, a blend of English and German that was uniquely ours. But with each passing week, our discussions deepened. The language, once a bridge and then a wall, transformed into a tapestry that enveloped us in colors of understanding. We talked about identity, culture, and our values, each thread strengthening the bond we had constructed over our differences. We shared our fears, Oliver expressing the insecurities of feeling linguistically inadequate, while I confessed my worries of losing touch with my heritage. And in those moments, the air filled with a shared understanding that surpassed words. Months later, as I nestled into the warmth of our oversized couch one rainy evening, surrounded by books and a steaming cup of herbal tea, it struck me how beautifully we had rebuilt our connection. The gray clouds draped outside, yet inside, it felt eternally sunlit with warmth and understanding. With my skin tingling from the memories of our journey, I decided to share our progress in a post on a Reddit community that focused on relationships. I titled my thread "A myth asshole wibda if I only spoke German to my husband despite him requesting I don't?" But as I typed, it felt less like a plea for validation and more a celebration of a love that had transcended language barriers. Lastly, I fondly recounted our journey, the blending of cultures, how we found our rhythm again, and I concluded with a question to the community: have you found harmony in your differences? As I posted it, a sense of relief washed over me. I had made it through a tumultuous chapter, and now we stood, hand in hand, ready to explore the landscapes of our vibrant, shared life together. Soon after, I received a wave of supportive and insightful replies, many expressing similar experiences, which encouraged me further. Later that night, as I drifted off to sleep, I looked over at Oliver, his peaceful face illuminated by the moonlight streaming through our window. I realized anew that love, much like language, is a journey, not a destination. Each step we took together unveiled not just the beauty in our differences, but also the harmony that lay within, patiently waiting to be discovered. As the soft glow of dawn began to fill our bedroom, I stirred awake to find Oliver already up, immersed in his morning ritual of brewing coffee. The rich aroma seeped through the air, weaving itself into the fabric of my thoughts. I watched him from the comfort of our rumpled bed, the way the sun kissed his tousled hair, and felt a swell of affection. This was our life, a gentle dance of routine and spontaneity. But underneath the surface, excitement tinged with a sense of trepidation lingered. Today marked the beginning of my exploration into joining a local German conversation group. After my post online, a number of people had urged me to enhance my language skills further, not just for my own fulfillment but for the bridge it could build between Oliver and me. I knew he wanted me to improve my English as well, and while he supported my passion, there was still a mutual understanding hovering between us that needed to be navigated carefully. The group met in a cozy cafe downtown, where laughter mingled with the sounds of clinking cups and the soft whir of the espresso machine. As I stepped inside, the chatter seemed to swallow me whole. I spotted a table filled with fellow language adventurers, each with a story and a shared commitment to embracing a new tongue. With a nervous smile, I slid into an empty chair, the warmth of the gathering slowly enveloping me. Conversations took flight as we practiced phrases, stuttered over difficult pronunciations, and stumbled through the occasional awkward silence, laughter breaking the tension. I felt a spark of something familiar igniting within me, an eagerness to embrace the nuances. It was exhilarating, yet I couldn't shake the thought of Oliver, wondering if he would feel left out or if he was simply letting me fly on this new adventure. That evening, as we settled back into our routine, I couldn't help but share my excitement with Oliver. His face lit up with a genuine smile, yet beneath the enthusiasm, I sensed a flicker of apprehension. "It sounds amazing, actually," he said, pausing as if weighing his words carefully. "But promise me you'll still speak with me in English when we're home. I want you to feel free to express yourself with me fully." His earnest gaze met mine, sincerity draping each syllable in warmth. As I nodded, I could feel the weight of our unspoken understanding, a desire to balance my passion with the importance of our connection. However, the next few days were an exercise in self-discipline and compromise. I found myself wanting to slip into German more often, the phrases just at the tip of my tongue, eager to dance into the spaces we shared. But in doing so, I sometimes caught a glimpse of Oliver's discomfort, the furrowed brow when he couldn't follow my excitement, the brief silence when I spoke a sentence too rapid in my newfound confidence. This tug of war between my zeal and his request started to weigh on my heart. Were the walls I erected to protect my love inadvertently turning impenetrable? After a particularly frustrating attempt at explaining a simple story in German to him, resulting in more confusion than connection, I felt a rush of guilt clawing at my insides. I walked to the window, looking out at the twilight blending into night, the world outside a tapestry of muted colors. It struck me then how language, glorious as it could be, was a tool meant for connection, not division. Perhaps I had let my excitement overshadow the core of our relationship, and a wave of remorse flooded over me as I thought of our conversations where he patiently navigated between my two languages. That night, I made a decision. I turned to Oliver, who was curled up with a book of his own, and took a deep breath. "How about we create space for both?" I suggested softly, and he glanced up, surprise flickering across his features. "Let's set aside specific times for German. And when you're tired or lost, I'll be right here, ready to help you navigate back to English. Let's learn together. His eyes shone with a mix of understanding and relief as a smile broke across his face. In the following weeks, we embraced this newfound rhythm. Each night, we dipped into German for a little while, navigating through stories, fairy tales we both loved, or snippets from the news that intrigued us. When the words stumbled, we laughed until our stomachs hurt, and I cherished the look in his eyes as they sparkled with shared discovery and patience. Our evenings were filled with light-hearted attempts at pronunciation, playful teasing when one of us would mix up words, and the comforting realization that no matter the language, love threaded itself seamlessly between us. As I lay in bed amidst the whispers of night, I smiled, feeling a warmth blanket around my heart. I had aimed for fluency, but what I had found was something richer, an intimacy forged through compassion and understanding. Each mistake became a stepping stone, revealing the path that lay not just to understanding German, but deeper connections that breathed life into our relationship. The journey of language became a metaphor for our love story, filled with missteps yet painted with the beauty of growth, both together and individually. And as I reached for Oliver's hand, I realized that love, like language, was a living, breathing entity, forever expanding, ever changing, but always anchored in the safety of shared affection. It all started on a rainy Thursday when I found myself staring at my phone, contemplating whether I should answer the call from Jamie. Jamie and I had been best friends since childhood, our lives woven together like the strands of an old tapestry. He was the kind of person who wore his heart on his sleeve, and while I admired him for that, it often led to the kind of emotional labors that I sometimes felt ill-prepared to navigate. The thing is, I owed him $60 from a bet we placed 3 months prior. At the time, it felt like a good idea. He had bet I wouldn't see a specific movie in theaters, a kind of absurd challenge we often entertained to pass the time. I had pulled through and watched it, laughing at how easily I'd won. But life had a funny way of making one's priorities feel scattered, and with each passing month, that small debt lingered in the back of my mind, like a familiar yet annoying itch I couldn't quite reach. As I sat on my couch, the rain beating against the window, I felt an odd sense of dread. Jamie had been talking about his financial struggles lately, how his part-time job didn't cover his rent or his bills, and I could feel the weight of that call pressing against my chest. I hesitated for a moment, finally picking up the phone, but the conversation wasn't what I anticipated. Instead of the usual banter, Jamie launched into a heartfelt rant about how he felt completely overwhelmed by the world. It was like listening to a dam break, all his frustrations flowing out as he told me about the suffocating weight of his responsibilities. As he spoke, I felt my stomach twist into knots. How could I ask him to let go of this trivial debt when he was clearly in pain? "Look, Jamie, I just need to say something," I interrupted hesitantly. "I know I owe you that $60, but with everything going on, can we just let it slide for now?" I could hear the silence on the other end, how the weight of my words sank into the atmosphere, and I could almost picture his brow furrowing in contemplation. Finally, he spoke, and there was a tremor in his voice. "You know, I really need that money, though." My heart sank deeper. I wanted to help him, but the truth was, my own finances weren't exactly stable. It felt selfish to hold on to my money, but asking him for patience felt equally wrong. Days turned into weeks, and our conversation echoed in my mind like a haunting melody. I could see Jamie's disappointment flash across my memory, see the disbelief etched into his features, and the burden of guilt settled firmly on my shoulders. I tried to reach out, perhaps offering to treat him to coffee or something small to remind him that I cared, but our meetings became fewer as he threw himself into extra shifts. Just as I was spiraling into my own feelings of guilt, Jamie reached out once more, but this time, there was an edge to his voice that set me on alert. He wanted to meet up, and with that, I felt a sense of impending doom settle over me. Did he want to discuss the money again, or was there something else brewing beneath the surface? The anxiety was palpable inside me, it was almost a physical thing, weighing heavy on my chest as I approached the cafe we frequented. When I arrived, he was already seated at our usual table, fidgeting with his phone, looking tangled up in thought. I slid into the seat and gave him a small smile, which he returned with a nod that seemed devoid of any real warmth. "I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation," he began, his voice steady but lacking its usual enthusiasm. "That money. It's not just about the money for me. It feels like a lack of respect, like you don't value our friendship." The words hit me like a slap, and I felt my chest constrict with shame. I started to defend myself, but I could hear the raw hurt in his voice, and my mind raced to find the right words that wouldn't sound like empty excuses. "I thought maybe since things were hard for you, We could let it slide. His gaze was piercing, and I could almost see the crumbling pieces of our history floating between us. The conversations we used to have, the laughter we shared, now felt grim and fragile, like the remnants of a dream slipping away. But it's not just about the money, it's the principle, he pressed, emotion layered in each word. I could sense the anger rising, and a part of me wanted to retreat, but I owed it to both of us to engage. Jamie, it's not that I don't care or value you. I'm trying to navigate my own life too. What if I'm struggling in my own way, just like you? The moment hung heavy, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in his armor begin to show. I didn't realize you felt that way, he admitted, his voice low, the fight momentum suddenly dulled. I could see the realization wash over him, just as much as it flooded me. Perhaps I wasn't the only one struggling with insecurities masked as arrogance. In the days that followed, we both took a step back, breathing in the unease of our friendship and beginning to stitch it back together with more understanding. I did pay him back the 60, I realized that money was only one part of the equation. What mattered more was the open dialogue we finally had, the clarity that settled between us, allowing both our vulnerabilities to emerge. This experience transformed our friendship. It was no longer about the money but about feeling seen and valued. An update in my mind now gleefully whispered to me, I learned that competitions between friends can lead to both friction and an unexpected depth in connection. Looking back, that seemingly trivial debt acted like a guidepost, leading me to confront not just my financial responsibilities, but my emotional ones too. It became a lesson in empathy and respect, a reminder that true friendship treasures open-hearted conversations over mere transactions. And those rainy Thursdays? They aren't so dreary anymore, as they've become. Reminders of our renewed bond, strengthened through vulnerability, reminding me every day that sometimes, it's worth diving deeper to find the light. As I settled into my routine, the mundanity of each rainy Thursday transformed into a ritual of sorts. Each week, I would sit on my porch, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, as the rain drizzled on the roof above, creating a comforting soundtrack of muted rain patters and distant thunder rumbles. The street, with its slick, glistening pavement, took on a different hue. Each drop of water seemed to wash away not just the grime of the day but also the tension that had once hovered between James and me. I would think back to that moment when I looked him in the eyes and saw the hurt festering beneath the surface, beneath our laughter and easy banter, like an unresolved question lurking in the shadows. It was in this quiet space of reflection that I learned the importance of humility and accountability, both to myself and to those closest to me. I never forgot that debt, the $60 that, at one point, felt insurmountable, almost like a millstone around my neck. Yet that very symbol of conflict became a mirror, prompting a deeper inquiry into how I navigated my relationships. James and I began to spend more time together, engaging in long talks that seemed endless under the canopy of evening stars or the dim, warm glow of a dimmed living room. We would play board games, dive into old movies, and explore our small town's hidden gems, often with laughter trailing behind us like a kite on a gentle breeze. Those moments drew out a connection I hadn't known we'd lacked before. Conversations became more meaningful, filled with genuine inquiries into each other's lives, worries, and dreams. There was a palpable shift. The unspoken tension was replaced with a camaraderie built on shared experiences and vulnerability. No longer did I feel the burden of that $60. Instead, it served as the catalyst for deeper exchanges. One particularly rainy Thursday, as we sipped our drinks and watched the clouds roll in, I opened up. You know, I used to think friendship was just about hanging out and having fun, James. But I realize now it's about the tough stuff too, like debts and misunderstandings. I really appreciate how we've navigated through all of that. It brought us closer. He nodded, looking pensive, and then he smiled softly. I have to admit, I felt awkward about it, too. It wasn't just the money, it was what it represented. I don't want to feel like I'm holding something over you when all I really want is your company. The honesty hung in the air, wrapping around us like the comforting embrace of the warm sweaters we wore. I chuckled at the absurdity of how a financial transaction had morphed into a vehicle for deeper understanding. James reached for his phone, and with a twinkle in his eye, he pulled up a meme that perfectly encapsulated our journey, and we erupted into laughter, once again transported to a place where our bond felt effortless. That evening, the rain intensified, pounding against windows like a drum, but instead of keeping us boxed in, it felt liberating, an orchestra accompanying our newfound harmony. As the weeks turned into months, I cherished those Thursdays, never missing a chance to reconnect and nurture our friendship. I even made a mental note to repay the $60, but truthfully, it mattered less and less with each passing conversation. The emphasis shifted from debt to conversation, from obligation to connection. In a way, our playful banter transformed into discussions that danced around deeper themes: life, love, aspirations, and I began to realize that money and obligations are mere facets of a much larger picture. One evening, James surprised me with an early birthday celebration, a small gathering with close friends. As we settled in with laughter and stories, I felt a sense of belonging wash over me, filling the gaps that I'd sometimes not even noticed existed. In that warm glow, I leaned over and whispered to James, "Hey, I owe you something." He looked at me quizzically, his eyebrow raised, and I continued, this deep sense of gratitude for helping me see what truly matters. He just chuckled and nudged me playfully, a silent acknowledgement of our journey together. Though the rainy Thursdays still came, they carried a different energy now. They were soaked in laughter, born of warmth, and threaded with the beautiful realization that sometimes a rough patch can lead to a tapestry of richer connections. And though I never explicitly paid him back that $60, what emerged was far more valuable, an understanding that true friendship transcends financial debts, weaving an everlasting bond that brightens even the darkest of days. Perhaps, in its own way, that really was a payment worth cherishing. In the weeks that followed, I found myself smiling each time I heard the gentle patter of rain against my window. What used to feel monotonous now evoked an aurora of warmth in my heart. Those rainy Thursdays transformed into a cherished routine. I could almost hear the rain whispering secrets of camaraderie while I shuffled into my living room, bundled in a cozy blanket, a steaming mug of tea cradled in my hands. My phone buzzed to life, and a familiar name lit up the screen: Lucas. We had developed our own rhythm, a dance of banter and understanding that flowed easily, aided by shared memories and laughter. "Hey, you ready for our rain date?" the text read. Smiling to myself, I replied with a quick always. As I threw on my favorite hoodie, ready to dive into yet another cozy chapter of our friendship. Lucas arrived shortly after, a playful grin plastered across his face. "I brought snacks," he announced, producing a crinkly bag of popcorn and some gummy bears as if they were the treasures of a long-lost expedition. Settled on my couch, we slipped into our ritual, Netflix binging through the dreariest of mean days, outlining an adventure. Dipping into the surreal and the comedic, tracing myriad twists across genres, just like our conversations. And as the rain continued its serenade outside, something curious happened. Each time we laughed, each time we shared a meaningful look or a story from our past, I often found myself reflecting on the emotional balance we'd struck, threading through memories that we hadn't quite explored before. "I was thinking about that one time you tried to teach me how to cook," Lucas teased, nudging my shoulder. "You nearly burnt the house down." We both erupted in laughter, the shared embarrassment that once lurked in the corners now an emblem of progress, of understanding we had built upon one another's vulnerabilities. "Hey, don't forget I saved our lives from those flaming pancakes," I countered, recalling the chaos with a smirk. He shot back an exaggerated gasp, mock horror in his eyes. "I wouldn't call them pancakes. They were more like edible hockey pucks," I laughed harder, each taunt adding another layer to the fabric of our friendship. But nestled amid all the joy was something heavier, lurking just beneath the surface, a quiet contemplation about the essence of our exchanges. I had been hesitant to confront the emotional complexities that lay intertwined with our shared experiences. It was Lucas who finally led me there, unknowingly yet gently. With the popcorn bowl long emptied and the final credits rolling on yet another movie, I found myself breaking the easy banter, wanting to lay bare a thought that had occupied my mind. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about that $60, I said, sifting through my memories. "It's strange, but I feel like it became this little anchor for me, a symbol of how we needed that moment back then." Lucas turned to me, and his gaze grew serious. "You really don't need to feel guilty about that. I mean, we've moved past it, haven't we?" His voice was gentle, yet firm, a guiding light through the murkier waters. "But I appreciate that you're thinking of it differently now." The honesty in his tone ignited a flicker of warmth inside me. It showed me how fragile friendships can feel, how they can be caught up in miscommunications or assumptions. But it also reminded me of how imperative it is to find that empathy, to seek understanding instead of cementing a line between us. We lingered in that silence, where nothing needed to be filled with words as the calming sound of raindrops on the window enveloped us. But as if carrying the weight of that moment, I reached for him, causing a spontaneous whirlwind of revelations to unspool between us. "Thank you for being patient with me through all that. What are friends for?" He shrugged, smiling softly, yet the sincerity rippled through his eyes, anchoring me in the moment. That revealed something profound within me. The comfort of connection we had both nurtured through our shared antics and deep conversations was everything I had truly needed, more than any monetary value ever could hold. I realized that it wasn't about erasing the debt, nor tying it neatly with a bow, but about celebrating the transformation it had invoked in us. And as we settled into a more comfortable silence, I felt a lightness wash over me, the previously heavy air of expectations gently dispersing into something far richer. Fast forward again to another rainy Thursday. It was becoming my favorite sanctuary each week. This time, I felt the soft tickle of excitement ripple through my veins as Lucas arrived with a new bottle of board games and tales ready to unfurl. We played, we teased, and we occasionally drifted into deeper conversations, additional layers of our lives revealed moment by moment. In the end, I didn't need to pay him back. Instead, the debt faded, replaced instead by a tapestry of trust woven through shared experiences, a deeper connection that shimmered more brightly than any money exchanged could manage. And through the seemingly mundane, fragile threads of rainy Thursdays, we built a bond that could weather any storm, eager and ready for whatever lay ahead. They say that family gatherings can bring out the best and worst in people, but I didn't realize just how deep the wound could cut until that Saturday evening at my cousin's house. It started innocently enough. The aroma of baked lasagna wafted through the air, mingling with laughter and the clinking of wine glasses. Family members gathered around, catching up, reminiscing, and sharing stories from the past, and I had joined in, feeling that familiar blend of comfort and anxiety. You see, I was always the sensitive one in the family, overly emotional, easily offended, so as I sat there, listening to tales of my cousin Lucy's recent engagements and her plans for marriage, my heart felt lighter amidst the cheerful banter. But then, in a twist I didn't see coming, Lucy, in her exuberance, turned the spotlight onto me. "What about you, Jenna? Still single? I mean, at your age?" She trailed off, a smirk forming at the corners of her mouth, while a few chuckles erupted around the table. In that moment, a familiar pang of humiliation rushed through me, clashing against the happiness around me like a sudden summer storm. I had always tried to take the high road, to brush off the barbs and the subtle criticisms, but this time, a suffocating heat surged through me, igniting a fire I hadn't anticipated. While everyone laughed, I felt the weight of my solitude pressing down hard on my chest. I noticed my mother's eyes dart towards me, filled with concern, but Lucy continued her teasing, commenting on how you can't be too picky, as if my worth was reduced to my marital status. I smiled weakly, nodding along, but internally, I was anything but jovial. As the laughter settled, I decided to excuse myself, perhaps a walk would clear my head. I slipped into the kitchen, where the centerpiece of the gathering awaited, a stunning, beautifully decorated vanilla cake adorned with fresh fruit. It had always been a family favorite, and as its fragrant sweetness enveloped me, I felt the anger bubbling just below the surface. I didn't know what came over me, but suddenly the idea of taking the cake felt like a rebellious act against the emotional daggers lodged in my heart. In a moment of impulse, I cut a generous slice, placed it on a plate, and with my resolve set, I headed for the door. The cool evening air hit my face as I wrapped my cardigan around me tightly, trying to physically hold in the swirl of emotions that threatened to spill over. I drove home in a daze, the cake still resting in my passenger seat, and the weight of my actions began to settle in the pit of my stomach. Was I really so petty to leave a family gathering with what was supposed to be a shared joy, all because of a hurtful remark? By the time I reached home, I was engulfed by confusion and guilt. As the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows danced across my living room, I dropped the plate onto the coffee table, staring at the perfectly frosted slice as if it were an artifact of my latest emotional breakdown. I tried to convince myself it was about self-preservation, about valuing myself beyond what others deemed worthy, but I knew deep down I was struggling to find validation in the most childish of actions. Later that night, as I sat hunched over on my couch with that slice of cake in hand, the sweet flavor somehow tasted bitter on my tongue. I pulled out my phone, contemplating sharing my story on a Reddit community like AITA to get a sense of perspective, but instead, I spent my evening lost in thought, replaying the events over and over like a record on a loop. I knew I wouldn't be welcomed back with open arms after this little incident, but more importantly, I also recognized that the love I sought in the laughter of my family was something I needed to cultivate within myself. Sometimes, it's easier to blame others for our pain rather than confronting the inner void we're trying to escape. Days later, I volunteered to host the next gathering. It was time to face my fears, and yes, offer an apology, not for taking the cake, but for reacting the way I did. As I whipped up a new dessert, a bounty of chocolate truffle cake, I decided I would address the elephant in the room with a smile. Upon entering the room that day, I felt my heart race, and as I looked into the familiar faces of my family, I took a deep breath, ready to reclaim not just a slice of cake, but a piece of my happiness. And if that meant setting boundaries and communicating my feelings, then so be it. After all, sometimes family gatherings call for more than just good food, they demand a little honesty. As I stood at the entrance, cake box cradled in my arms, a slight wave of apprehension washed over me. I could already hear the laughter and familiar voices, each echo stirring a blend of nostalgia and dread. Family gatherings had never been easy for me, especially after last year's disastrous Christmas dinner, where playful jabs turned into a full-blown roast of my life choices. I'd left that evening with my pride bruised and my spirits deflated, clinging to the memory of my half-eaten slice of pumpkin pie as if it were a lifeline. Now, however, with this chocolate truffle cake crafted from my heart, I wanted to approach things differently. Maybe the key was to balance affection with honesty, to sprinkle a little truth into the convivial chaos of family life. As I stepped into the living room, the scent of cinnamon and pine wafted through the air, wrapping around me like a familiar hug. The tree stood tall in the corner, adorned with mismatched ornaments that represented years of shared experiences, each with its own story to tell. My cousins sat in clusters, animatedly discussing their latest accomplishments, promotions, engagements, and this Christmas hottest gifts. I wanted to join in, to share my own victory, which was simply surviving a year of self-reflection and personal growth. Instead, I hovered near the door, setting the cake down on a nearby table as voices rose and fell like waves crashing onto a shore. "Hey, do you need help with that?" My older brother, Matt, called over his shoulder, scrolling through his phone with the other hand. I forced a smile, feeling a warmth at his offer, yet quickly dispelling it. "Nope, I've got it," I replied, my tone a tad too cheerful, a shield against unkind words that crept to the edge of my mind. He muttered under his breath, his lingering gaze indicating he wasn't buying my bravado. As if on cue, Aunt Linda entered the room, her aroma of lavender overpowering my sense of comfort. "What's that you've got there?" she chimed, glancing at the dessert with a mix of feigned disinterest and genuine curiosity. "It's chocolate truffle cake." I beamed, hoping to draw her in, to share in the anticipation of something wholesome. I thought it would be nice. My gut twisted slightly as I awaited the inevitable critique. Sure enough, she smirked, her eyes narrowing in amusement. "Another dessert attempt, huh? I don't know why you keep trying. Maybe aim for something more simple next time?" A little knot formed in my stomach. I had prepared mentally for this. A volley of comments targeting my culinary skills had become a family tradition. However, her words tumbled over one another, forming a barrier between my excitement and her dismissive tone. I thought everyone might enjoy it," I said, my voice faltering, feeling the heat of embarrassment creeping up my neck. "Of course, we want to enjoy it, like the time you tried to bake those gourmet brownies. You remember how that went, right?" The laughter that followed her words sliced through the room, red-hot embarrassment igniting the feelings I'd buried deep. The warmth I had felt upon entering evaporated in an instant, replaced by that familiar sting of hurt. I gathered my resolve, the year's worth of healing impulses swirling in my mind. With the cake box in one hand and my heart thundering in my chest, I made the decision to step back from the farce. The words I'd been rehearsing all week danced on the edge of my tongue, waiting to be spoken. "You know, I thought gatherings like this were supposed to be a moment of joy, a time to lift each other up instead of tearing one another down." The room fell silent, my voice trembled against the weight of the gathered family. "I'm tired of feeling like my efforts are just fodder for jokes." Staring into the faces of my family, a mixture of surprise and discomfort washed over them. I took a breath. "It's okay to joke around, but let's keep it kind. I bring things here because I want to share my joy, not to be an easy target." The cake was my emotional anchor, a creation that represented the energy and thought I poured into every layer, and as I held it firmly, I began to feel the walls of isolation slowly crumble. A heavy pause filled the air, then one of my cousins, Hannah, stood up. "You're right. Honestly, we're all just so wrapped up in our own little lives. Sometimes that we don't realize how our words impact others." Her honesty served as a reminder that beneath the laughter, we were all human, wrestling with our insecurities. As she spoke, I noticed the softening in their expressions, a newfound awareness glinting in their eyes. Aunt Linda swallowed hard, her expression shifting from smugness to contemplation. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I'm proud of you for trying something new." The corners of my mouth lifted slightly as I observed the shift unfolding. Emily, another cousin, chimed in next. "Yeah, let's put a stop to old traditions that make someone feel less than. How about we try a slice together?" With that simple gesture, I felt the tension dissipate. As I retrieved my cake, my heart began to heal, the forks gleaming beneath the light like beacons of hope for new beginnings. In that moment, I realized reclaiming my happiness wasn't just about addressing the hurt, it was about reminding them of the strength found in honesty and vulnerability. As the first slice was served and laughter resumed, I felt like I was finally leaving behind the shadow of last year's self-doubt, replacing it with the light of acceptance and love. Weeks later, I'm scrolling aimlessly through my phone when I notice a text from Matt. "Hey, Mom says your cake's a hit. You should bring it to the next get-together, too." I chuckled quietly, tapping on the screen to respond. "Will do. And this time, I might just bake something with vegetables." His reply came instantly, "As long as it's not another gourmet disaster." The laughter I shared with my family that night still echoed in my heart, an ongoing reminder that vulnerability opens doors, nudging us all to grow together, cake in hand. As I sat with my phone in hand, memories of that evening flooded back, carrying with them an assortment of flavors, scents, and sentiments. I could still taste that rich chocolate truffle cake, its smooth texture melting away as I shared it with my family, and the way the subtle sweetness of laughter filled the air just as much as the dessert. The incident had unlocked something deeper within our family dynamic, particularly between myself and my siblings, who had, more often than not, let the familiar warmth of gathering slip into passive-aggressive banter or awkward silences over the years. I found myself reflecting on how, for so long, I had worn my feelings like armor, believing that silence would shield me from judgment. Yet, the night I took my cake and my voice to that gathering felt like shedding an old skin, the uncomfortable weight of unresolved tension replaced by unexpected revelations. Everyone had their share of struggles, insecurities, and misunderstandings. Even my brother Matt, who always seemed to flit through social interactions with a devil-may-care attitude, had approached me afterward with more sincerity than I had anticipated, apologizing for teasing me. Over the years, I sometimes took poking fun at you for the laughs, but it hit me that maybe I was just scared you'd never find your place among us if I didn't make you laugh, he said, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. I appreciated the hidden layers beneath his light-hearted facade, and it was in that moment I realized how we all had this habit of using humor as a safety net, a distraction from exploring feelings that might seem too heavy to hold. Weeks turned into a month, and that gathering was a thread of joy woven into our complex family tapestry. I received sporadic texts from Matt, including silly memes and inside jokes, an invitation to keep the dialogue open. It became evident that while humor deflected deeper conversations, it also paved the way for them. We grew comfortable with these new forms of communication, intertwining laughter with the honesty I had begun to embrace. It was a dance, each step closer to connection that sent out ripples of understanding. One day, in a moment of spontaneity, I whipped up another dessert, a bright carrot cake with warm spices and a rich cream cheese frosting, reminiscent of my childhood. I decided to bring it to the next informal family barbecue, hoping to extend this bridge of vulnerability further. As the day approached, I felt the familiar tingle of excitement mixed with a sprinkle of anxiety. I hoped the atmosphere would echo that previous encounter, filled with both sweet and savory exchanges rather than resulting in silence laden with unexpressed feelings. When the day finally arrived, I went through a whirlwind of emotions, bustling through the kitchen with my cake in hand, feeling proud when family members admired my baking skills. But deep down, I noticed the flutter of worry creeping in as I waited for but that friends and family often added to compliments. "This one is lovely, but..." To my surprise, however, the admiration flowed seamlessly, encouraging conversations that built upon one another rather than deflating at any sign of pressure. I found myself having a heart-to-heart with my cousin Lisa, who confided her own struggles with balancing expectations from family and career. We laughed, remembered joys from our childhood, and marveled at how our family had evolved. The night unfolded in a tapestry of dialogue and connection, punctuated by delicious bites of cake and rich laughter. I noticed Matt laughing heartily after recalling one of my kitchen's disasters, only to pause, trendy drink in hand, and add, "But the way you turn this into a thing is what makes you special. I'd never have the courage to put myself out there like that." It struck me how my willingness to assert my feelings had formed a ripple effect, encouraging honesty around the table, transforming our conversation into mirrors reflecting our vulnerabilities. And in that moment, I realized that the laughter, the mixed flavors of cake, and the weaving together of our stories were intertwined. Expressions of love and acceptance. As the gathering came to a close, I left that night with more than just the satisfaction of having baked another delicious cake. I carried with me a deeper understanding of vulnerability, one that left room for growth, connection, and an unshakable sense of belonging. And so, in the days that followed, the narratives we shared became evolving chapters. Each cake I brought to the table was a fresh page in a family saga, where laughter, honesty, and love continued to rise just like the desserts that brought us together. It was a chilly Sunday afternoon, the kind where the fading light seemed to seep through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the living room, and I found myself curled up in my favorite chair with a steaming mug of chamomile tea cradled between my hands. My name is Lucy, and at 32, I have perfected the art of being the family mediator. My brother, Ben, is 4 years younger than me and has always been the golden child, charming, athletic, and now engaged to Tara, a woman who seemed equally perfect on the surface. Lately, however, something about Tara felt off, and on that particular afternoon, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I needed to talk to my mom about it. We settled into our usual routine, chatting about the mundane details of the week, until I finally broached the subject, tentatively mentioning how I had overheard a conversation between Ben and Tara that felt suspicious. It was more about her complications during the pregnancy than anything else, and although I initially brushed it off, the unease had lingered long after. Mom listened intently, her brow furrowing as I recounted the conversation. I wasn't trying to gossip, it was more an attempt to express my concern, to make sense of the tension building in my family. As I spoke, I could see the worry etched on my mother's face, and I almost regretted opening up. What if it upset her or made her doubt her son's judgment? The last thing I wanted was to fracture our family dynamic. But the more I spoke, the more I felt that maybe I wasn't the only one who sensed something amiss. My mom finally took a deep breath, and with an incredulous look, she shared how she too had observed odd behaviors from Tara, especially how she seldom spoke of the baby without a hint of hesitation. My heart raced, teetering on the edge of suspicion. Was it possible that my gut instinct was right? The conversation spiraled, weaving through layers of what-ifs, and soon we were digging into the details of Tara's past, which we had only pieced together from Ben's largely glowing accounts. The discussion fueled a whirlwind of emotions within me. It felt strange to judge someone who was soon to be family, but there was an undeniable tension growing like a shadow over our household. Days passed, and despite my desire to distance myself from the tumultuous thoughts, I found myself contemplating my brother's happiness and sanity. The knowledge of my chat with my mom nagged at me. Was I being the supportive sibling or merely perpetuating family drama? The more I pondered, the heavier the air felt, until one evening, Ben called me unexpectedly. He sounded off, his voice trembled slightly, and his laughter felt forced. The perfect brother had cracked. My stomach twisted, and I listened as he talked about the challenges of impending fatherhood, how Tara's recent erratic behavior was something he was trying to understand. I wanted to scream, "You've got to be careful." But instead, I urged him to lean on me if he ever needed to vent. I realized then how much I cared for him and how reluctant I was to see him hurt, but did that make me an asshole for even discussing my worries with Mom in the first place? In a moment of vulnerability, I decided to confide in Ben about the conversation with Mom. I expected outrage, a defensive posture, but to my surprise, he was quiet, contemplative. He promised to talk things over with Tara. After hanging up, nausea washed over me. Was it right to have stirred this pot, or was I simply being protective? The weight of my choices felt suffocating, and while I hoped it would lead to clarity, I feared the storm it could unleash. Weeks later, something unforeseen happened. Ben called again, but this time his voice was laced with relief. Tara had agreed to family counseling, and during their discussions, it had come out that she had been under immense pressure, family struggles and the overwhelming fears of motherhood were buried deep, and she had masked them behind a facade of happiness. It wasn't deceit, it was pain, and a fear of inadequacy that I had never considered. My heart sank as I realized how misguided my suspicions had been. I had put Tara under the spotlight without truly knowing her story, and now I was left with mixed feelings about the gossip I shared with my mom. What I thought was an innocent conversation had triggered a catalyst for something much deeper. In the end, I breathed a sigh of relief, not just for Ben but for Tara too, who was at last seeking the help she desperately needed. I turned to my mom, who had been waiting anxiously to hear the news, and laughed softly at how quickly things had spiraled out of control. I realized I wasn't an asshole, I was simply human, trying to navigate the chaos of family life. Family dynamics certainly are complicated, filled with emotions that intertwine like vines. As I sipped my tea and reflected on the journey, I felt a sense of calm enveloping me, and I could finally embrace the imperfections that came with love. Maybe it was all just part of the messiness, and I wouldn't shy away from it again. Update: a few months later, Tara invited my mom and me for coffee, and for the first time, I saw a woman who had started to find her footing once again. We talked openly, and I realized the power of vulnerability and healing. This was no longer about suspicion or gossip, it was about connection and understanding. As I sat among family, a newfound sense of openness enveloped me, and I knew we were all moving forward together, one step at a time. The shadows had lifted, revealing a path to a stronger family bond, forged through honesty and love. As the warm sunlight flooded through the cafe window, illuminating the small round table where my mother, Tara, and I sat, I couldn't help but think about how far we had all come in just a few short months. The echoes of past gossip and the weight of previous misunderstandings felt like distant memories, replaced instead by the sound of laughter and heartfelt conversation. Tara, once a figure cloaked in suspicion and tension, now radiated a sense of acceptance that I hadn't anticipated. She spoke candidly about her struggles, her voice steady, yet softening with each word, a stark contrast to the defensiveness that had once marked our exchanges. The cafe buzzed with the hum of patrons and the clinking of cups, but in that small bubble of shared vulnerability, it felt as if time had consolidated just for us. I shared my feelings about the turmoil that had erupted within our family, how the whispering fears about her integrity had clouded our judgment, and how difficult it had been to navigate my loyalty to my mother while also grappling with my concerns about Tara's motives. Yet, as we spoke, her eyes shone with a depth of understanding that made me realize she had been fighting her own battles, ones I had overlooked in my eagerness to protect my brother. It dawned on me that the gossip which had initially driven a wedge between us now served as a gateway for true connection, a means through which we could strip away our facades and share our inner truths. At that moment, surrounded by the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the simple delight of a sunlit afternoon, I felt the bonds of family stretching and reshaping. We laughed gently as we reminisced about lighter memories, free from the weight of suspicion, and I could feel an invisible thread weaving us tighter together. My mom, watching this exchange with a quiet smile, seemed relieved to witness the evolution of our dynamic, as if years of tension were finally easing from her shoulders. It was a strange familiarity, one I hadn't realized I missed so deeply, where we could just be ourselves without hidden agendas or whispered worries. As our cups clinked in a toast to new beginnings, I felt a deep-seated hope rise within me. We were healing, yes, but it was more than that. We were rebuilding, a family not just forged from blood, but from shared experiences and a commitment to understanding one another in our most vulnerable states. We talked about future family gatherings and the kids we hoped to have, and for the first time, I envisioned Tara as an aunt, someone my children could look up to. It felt liberating to finally embrace the idea that the bond we were forming could stand resilient, even against the tides of uncertainty we had all faced. The cafe buzz faded into the background as I silently vowed to always prioritize honesty and openness in our conversations moving forward. Little did I know that this meeting was only the beginning of our transformation. As we stood to leave, our spirits lifted, I caught Tara's eye, a shared understanding passing between us that hinted at the shared journey ahead, a commitment to support each other, to embrace our differences, and to keep the channels of communication wide open. Life, with all its complexities, was stretching out before us like an uncharted path, and for the first time, I felt eager rather than apprehensive about the road ahead. What started as mere speculation had blossomed into a deeper narrative of family and resilience, reminding us all of the possibility that lies within trust and vulnerability. With that beautiful thought, I stepped out into the sunlit streets, my heart lighter than it had been in years, feeling as if I had not only gained a second sister-in-law but also a true friend. In the months that followed, conversations flourished, misunderstandings disintegrated, and what we had once regarded as gossip became the foundation upon which we built a family rich in understanding and love. It was in those quiet moments of sharing our lives, our fears, and our dreams that I realized this journey was worth every misstep, every whisper, and every moment I had doubted. Tara had secured her place in our family, and together we forged a connection that was resilient and transformative, one step at a time. However, as life in our family resumed its comfortably chaotic rhythm, a lingering thought occasionally flickered in the back of my mind, resembling a distant chime reminiscence of the earlier unease. I had learned so much from the experience of sharing my doubts and fears with both my mother and Tara, yet the fact that the whispers had once permeated our lives felt like a dark echo, reverberating in corners I couldn't quite reach. Sure, We had emerged from the shadows, but I sensed that the path to unshakable trust in our relationships was still a winding one filled with cobbled stones left over from prior storms. One dusky evening, as I sat curled in my favorite armchair with a mug of chamomile tea in hand, I felt a pang of anxiety pierce through the warm comfort of our newfound familial harmony. I began to wonder, what if Tara's past could come surging back into the spotlight? What if, in our quest for connection, we had overlooked the footprints of doubt that still lingered on the edges of our joy? Those thoughts found their way into our gatherings, muted but present. It was a sort of shadow that crept around the edges of our conversations. Tara remained vibrant and engaged but seemed weary at times, like a flower that flourishes under sunlight, yet sometimes craves rain, anticipating its own inner storms with cautious apprehension. My brother Daniel and Tara had begun planning their wedding, and with every small detail shared in our new group discussions, there was an undercurrent of tension, tugging uncomfortably at my thoughts. Was this a facade? Were they both displaying happiness while secretly struggling? I wanted so badly to trust in what we had cultivated. I felt I owed it to Tara, to Daniel, and to myself, to believe in this fresh start wholeheartedly. Then, one afternoon, as our conversations continued to grow easier with each coffee date and family gathering, my mother called me with an urgency that shattered my calm. "Can you come over? Tara is here, and I think she's having a rough time." The air suddenly thickened around me, tangling my senses into a web of concern and confusion. I hurried over, my heart racing in rhythm with my thoughts. "Please, let this not be a step backward," I prayed silently as I drove through familiar streets now draped with an unease I had hoped was behind us. As I entered the house, I found Tara sitting in the living room, her face obscured by trembling hands, and my mother's eyes bright with unshed tears. Without needing words, I realized that this moment would determine if we could face any wave that life threw our way. Together, we could navigate through the tempestuous waters, or we could allow it to crash over us, unraveling our cherished connection. I settled beside Tara, taking a breath that felt like it carried the weight of my deepest fears. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed," I said gently, breaking the suffocating silence. In that moment, I prayed she would see my sincerity reflected in the depths of her own eyes. Slowly, Tara's shuddering breath steadied, and after the longest pause, she began to speak. Her voice trembled as she shared her insecurities, fears about the wedding, and the haunting doubts that echoed from her past. My heart ached to hear her struggles, yet I was grateful to witness her vulnerability. None of us were perfect, after all, and the beautiful tapestry of our lives was made richer by our imperfections. This unforeseen moment of honesty became a turning point. Instead of retreating into doubt, we leaned into our shared experiences, wrapping ourselves in understanding and compassion. The connection we had forged, mingled with the trials we faced, allowed us to weave our stories together tightly, creating not only a supportive circle but a sanctuary where we felt safe enough to wreck the facade of perfect happiness. From that day forward, I understood that our family was not just a collection of individuals expected to shine at all times. We were a constellation of glimmers and shimmers, quirks and quiet battles. With Tara by my side and my mother's unconditional love binding us together, we slowly unveiled each other's fears and dreams, transforming our past shadows into the light of awareness and compassion. I felt a renewed sense of hope fill my heart, reminding me that while the path may be winding, our willingness to be honest and vulnerable was the compass guiding us forward. The journey to healing is never linear, I learned. It's filled with dips and slides, with moments that may pull apart threads only to weave them closer again. Every time we face life's uncertainties together, I found solace in the realization that our love, our family bond, was worth the challenges. Moments of laughter mingled with tears became the framework of what family meant for us. As I reflected on our growth that night, an indelible thought struck me, echoing softly as I gradually drifted off to sleep. Even amidst the fragility of life, the strongest foundations are often built upon the honesty of shared experiences, nourishing the roots of love and friendship that grow resiliently with each passing moment. The morning sun spilled through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow across the table where I sat, a large glass of steaming coffee cradled between my hands. I wasn't what you'd call an extravagant person. In fact, I prided myself on my simplicity. But coffee, especially freshly brewed, was my guilty pleasure. It was the one indulgence I allowed myself in the otherwise orderly chaos of my life as a 31-year-old school teacher. My sister had dropped off my 8-year-old nephew, Jonah, for the weekend, as she often did when she needed a break, and while I adored the little guy, he could be a handful. Just that morning, as I indulged in my first sip of the rich, dark brew, Jonah peeked out from behind the living room couch, his eyes wide and filled with the innocent curiosity that made parenting both a joy and a challenge. I was aware of the rules around kids and caffeine. My sister often had gentle reminders about the dangers of caffeine for young ones like Jonah, yet I folded inwardly and thought about how I could have such a small moment to myself without feeling guilty. The coffee would surely not do him any harm if he just admired it from a distance, right? So there I sat, savoring that warmth, allowing myself to enjoy a moment of solitude amidst the weekend's planned chaos. As the rich scent twisted through the air, I heard Jonah's little feet skip closer, his eyes darting back and forth like he was deciding whether to venture deeper or stay put. "Aunt Mia, can I have some?" he asked, and I froze for a moment, the notion of sharing my coffee appalling yet amusing at the same time. Jonah, with his chocolate brown curls and cherubic face, gave me that hopeful gaze, and in that moment I felt the tug of decision weighing on my heart. On one hand, I wanted to tell him no, a responsible adult's instinct kicking in, fearing the rush that could send him bouncing off the walls and ruin our calm Saturday morning. But on the other hand, there was a certain sweetness and nostalgia tethered to my own childhood memories of adult behavior, a notion that adults had a magical drink that captivated and contented them. Just a little sip, I finally relented, pouring a single, cautious teaspoon into a small cup, the aroma rich and inviting. I watched as he took the cup in both hands, lifting it to his lips with a serious focus, and for a brief moment, I felt a sense of triumph, as if I had shared one of my cherished rituals with him, bonding beyond the usual aunt-nephew facade. But that triumph was overshadowed by a growing weight of doubt when Jonah made a grimace that could only be described as a mixture of confusion and alarm, his little face scrunching up as he choked on the unexpected bitterness. "Ew. That's gross," he exclaimed, immediately setting the cup down, and in that moment, I felt my heart sink. Embarrassment washed over me like a wave. Had I really just given my nephew coffee? What was I thinking? Guilt settled uncomfortably in my stomach, reminding me of the rules I had so carelessly brushed aside. Jonah's response echoed in my mind. The fun I thought we might have shared from the experience felt distant now, clouded by the undeniable responsibility that lay heavy upon me as an adult figure in his life. The thought that I might have clouded our weekend with repercussions played out in my head like an unexpected horror show, and my heartbeat quickened with the fear of needing to explain myself to my sister. Later that day, my worst fear was realized when Jonah casually mentioned our little coffee episode during dinner, and his mother's eyes flickered with a mix of surprise and concern. "Mia," she said, her voice carefully measured, "I thought we talked about this. What were you thinking?" It wasn't an accusatory tone, merely an acknowledgement of the boundaries we navigate to keep our kids safe, but it cut deeper than I expected. I introduced tension into a lively Saturday dinner, and guilt washed over me anew as I tried to defend my actions, explaining my reasoning, but it felt flimsy even to my own ears. The words stumbled out. Maybe I had been foolish, seeking to connect through something that, in hindsight, was never meant to be shared. I could feel my heart racing, the apprehensive air pooling around us in palpable silence as my sister measured her next words carefully. After the initial tension faded, the conversation softened, allowing me a moment of reflection. They say being a parent is full of mistakes, and I had just stumbled into mine, with a mere glass of coffee. Nevertheless, I was determined to learn from it, to be mindful of the small pleasures that should remain mine alone, while still being the aunt who brought joy. I wrapped up the evening by redirecting our focus to the cookies we made together earlier that day. It felt good to laugh and create new memories. As I put Jonah to bed that night, he clung to the memories of cookies and stories, the earlier incident slipping into the backdrop of laughter as if it had never happened. I tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and whispered an unspoken promise to myself that I would let the adults indulge, share the experience, yet hold to the boundaries that protected the innocence still residing in young hearts. A few weeks passed before I felt the urge to update on the timing of our coffee incident, one night after a large family gathering. Jonah, unwittingly overheard commenting to his mother about wanting to try coffee again when he grew up, brought an unexpected smile, tinged with regret, to my face. My sister looked at me with that knowing smile, a mix of affection and teasing that told me she understood I was learning from this, an aunt who cared deeply, yet found herself navigating the sometimes tumultuous waters of an alternative relationship. "Maybe just wait a few years, huh?" She would chuckle softly, and I could only nod, feeling a warm embrace of acceptance around the gentle, growing bond with my nephew that promised many more adventures to come, coffee aside. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with strokes of orange and purple, I leaned back against the worn-out couch of my sister's living room, enveloped in a comfort that was both nostalgic and suffocating. The laughter of my nephew, Lucas, still echoed in my ears, a melody of youthful innocence and wonder that reminded me of everything I cherished in our relationship. It was the first time I had seriously considered how my choices, even the seemingly trivial ones, might affect him. I thought of our earlier conversation, where his curious eyes had sparked with excitement at the thought of coffee, something I had once so eagerly introduced into my own life, imagining the day I could share it with him. A part of me felt a pang of guilt for sipping my steaming mug so casually, hardly second-guessing those age-old debates surrounding caffeine and childhood. My sister had always been the more conscientious parent, the one who would often reel me in for my more impulsive decisions. In many ways, I admired her for it. Even now, as she washed the dishes in her own rhythmic, calming manner, I could see her glancing back over her shoulder, her smile a testament to our unfinished conversations, as if gauging my mind state. "Want to help me with this?" she called out, gesturing to a pile of colorful plates glinting in the fading light, her voice a soft invitation. I stood, shaking off the remnants of self-reflection, and joined her in the kitchen. As we washed and dried, our chatter turned playful, bouncing between memories of our childhood and plans for the future. The scent of the lingering dinner wafted around us like a warm blanket, the comforting aroma of roasted chicken mingling with ginger and garlic, creating a homey atmosphere that only deepened our familial bond. It was in these moments that I truly felt the depth of my connection to her and to Lucas, with every shared laugh acting as a thread weaving us tighter together. Yet, the earlier discussion about coffee pooled in my thoughts, not dissipating but rather growing denser, revealing uncharted waters in my role as an aunt. Should I really wait for him? Should I not? I realized that it wasn't about the coffee at all, it was about modeling a relationship with choices, understanding, and ultimately, moderation. Would that cup of coffee, once presented to him, symbolize a moment of bonding, or could it come to represent something he may someday even struggle with in his own life? And what if my apparent acceptance of it pushed him to seek out experiences too soon? It was a delicate dance of influence, one that weighed heavily on my heart. By the time we finished cleaning up, the stars began to peek through the darkened sky, twinkling like distant thoughts of dreams yet to come. I turned to Lucas, who had taken up residence in the corner of the living room with a pile of Lego bricks that sparkled in every color imaginable, erupting into a miniature metropolis. His concentration was captivating, his little tongue peeked out in concentrated determination as he clicked two pieces together, forming something only he could see. I crouched beside him, resting my elbows on my knees, torn between wanting to acknowledge our previous conversation and wanting to admire his creations without intruding. "What are you building?" I asked, genuinely intrigued. He paused for a moment, glanced at me, and in his innocent wisdom replied, "A cafe. You can have coffee there, and I'll have lemonade. Maybe after we finish building, we can have a pretend coffee party." That beautiful blend of imagination and earnestness brightened my heart. His words shifted my perspective entirely. Instead of thinking about coffee as a potential source of conflict, I started to envision it like this magical centerpiece of an adventure, one where we could share not just drinks but laughter, stories, and dreams. There in that moment, understanding blossomed. Perhaps it wasn't about the right age for coffee but rather about creating safe spaces for experimentation and growth, together. I leaned in closer. "That sounds perfect, buddy. But let's keep the lemonade flowing first, maybe?" We both laughed, and I could feel the weight of uncertainty slipping from my shoulders like a fading shadow. Hours passed in what felt like mere moments, the cafe of imagination taking shape before us. Our pretended coffee party blossomed into a storyline unexpected yet wholly refreshing. In that playful creation, I found myself as not just an aunt but also a partner in adventure, letting go of predetermined answers and embracing openness instead. It was less about right or wrong, AITA labels, and more about connection, heart, and all the memories waiting to be made. As I tucked Lucas into bed later that night, he yawned widely, sleep creeping onto him like a gentle tide. I kissed his forehead and whispered goodnight, my heart swelling with the promise of more moments to come, both real and imagined. The warm embrace of family and joyous curiosity would forever be the backdrop to our memories, and while my inclination towards creating boundaries would always linger, I now saw clearly that love, laughter, and a big glass of playful imagination was more than enough to guide us forward. And as I slipped into my own bed that night, cozy under the covers, I couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps in our imperfect, vibrant tapestry of life, there was no real asshole, only uncontrollable love, transformative moments, and the chance to share in the whimsical journey of growing up together, sip by sip, lesson by lesson. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, the sun streaming through my bedroom window, determined to brush off the remnants of last night's contemplative mood. I lay there for a moment, blinking at the sunlight as it nudged me awake, and replayed the previous day's events in my mind. My thoughts flickered back to my nephew, a small whirlwind of laughter, mischief, and boundless energy that he was, and the peculiar mix of apologies and conversations that flowed between my sister and me. It was as if a gentle wave had washed over our relationship, yet another layer added to an already profound bond that had been built over years of shared stories, both poignant and silly. As I pulled on my favorite oversized sweater and ventured into the kitchen, the rich aroma of brewing coffee wafted through the air, a familiar embrace that welcomed me to the morning. I paused, contemplating how a simple morning ritual could transform into something deeper. The bubbling of the coffee machine harmonized with the soft chirping of birds just outside my window, working together to set the stage for a new day of connection. Just then, the kitchen door swung open, and in came my nephew, his hair tousled with sleep and eyes wide with excitement. "Auntie," he shouted, a huge grin stretching across his face, and I felt my heart swell. Here he was, full of potential, and I wanted nothing more than for him to know the warmth of genuine connection, even if it came with a side of caffeinated misunderstandings. We concocted a plan, a departure from our usual weekend routine. Today would be a day of adventure, designed around the imaginative whims of a 5-year-old. We decided to transform our small backyard into a coffee shop, complete with a makeshift menu scrawled on a piece of cardboard and a tea set I unearthed from the cupboard, which would serve our coffee, hot chocolate topped with whipped cream, of course. Tossing on our shoes and bursting outside, my nephew and I giggled as we pretended to grind coffee beans with theatrics, his little hands mimicking the motion dramatically as if he were an acclaimed barista. As the morning ebbed away, we turned our little shop into a flurry of activity, inviting my sister to join in on our fun. She chuckled along with us as we filled cups with chocolate, adorned with colorful sprinkles and chaotically topped with whipped cream. Each sip was a burst of joy, a testimony to the little moments that mattered so much. We served imaginary customers, took requests, and my nephew delighted in pretending to be the chief server, wearing a makeshift apron that hung like a shroud around his narrow shoulders. But amidst the laughter, I couldn't shake the thought of how easily miscommunication could stir waves of unease and overreaction, a whisper of anxiety tugging at the corners of my contentment. I watched him, absorbed in the make-believe world we created, and I realized that every moment we spent together was a lesson in understanding, his innocence reminding me of the joy and simplicity, yet also teaching me about nuances, about flaws and acceptance. If we could turn something as trivial as a glass of coffee into a heartfelt conversation about boundaries and love, then surely, we could navigate the complexities of our relationship with grace. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden hue over our backyard makeshift cafe, I felt a wave of conclusion wash over me. Our day had unfolded organically, each moment rich with laughter and genuine connection, reinforcing the idea that there are no real assholes in this journey, just individuals growing, learning, and sometimes misstepping. I looked at my sister, who caught my eye from where she sat, a knowing smile on her lips. We shared a silent agreement: we were navigating this beautifully complicated realm of family, side by side. That evening, as the stars began to twinkle overhead, I tucked my nephew in, sharing stories from my own childhood, the ones that inspired the creation of our backyard cafe. He listened intently, his eyelids drooping as a peaceful smile graced his lips. As I kissed him goodnight, a rush of hope filled my chest. This was only the beginning. We would continue to create, to explore, and to understand one another, sip by sip, lesson by lesson, growing together in the radiant tapestry of life. And who knew? Perhaps I'd bring a larger, warmer kind of coffee into our cafe the next time, but for now, this evening was perfect just as it was.